if you're going to say something that you don't want recorded.
Yes.
No, I'm good. Let's do it.
It's too late now because we're recording.
Yeah.
That sometimes happens around here.
All right, here we go. For those people, I'm not going to be in the chat room at all tonight, so I have no idea what's going on there.
It's all right. We'll keep an eye on it.
All right, so here we go. 5, 4.
This is the Misdirected Mark Podcast, a podcast about gaming, game mastering, and entertaining you, our listeners. We are explicit, and you have been warned, and I'd like to thank Mike Willard for letting us use his music on our show. Now let's pick up those mics and get on with this thing.
Why, yes, oh yes, oh yes. Let us pick up those mics and get on with this thing. On this, well, we should probably do that intro thing now that we actually have on this intro thing.
Oh my God.
What do you want, man?
I don't know. Look at the notes.
I remember I can't switch over because of the soundboard on my phone.
Problematic, right?
It is problematic. So here's the actual intro. Go ahead.
All right, Phil. He'll see you now.
What? What do you mean he'll see me now?
Phil, do you know why I've called you here?
Because it's Tuesday and we do the show.
Oh, forget that
Tuesdays?
part. I called you here because Gaming MBS is moving in our territory. Hobbs, he called me and he's telling me they're making a grab at the OSR crowd.
Are you serious?
Yes,
Well, what are you going to do about it?
Well, I talked to the other co-hosts and they're all in agreement.
We're going to war.
I don't know if this is a good idea. Brett's like, I mean, you've seen how heavily armed Brett is. Are you sure we can go up against that kind of firepower?
Look, I have a plan. I'm going to send you to Wisconsin to kill Kevin Lovecraft. That will send a message to those two and let them know we mean business.
I mean, I like Kevin a lot, but business is business. So go ahead and book me a flight. I'll take care of it.
And with that, welcome to the 302nd episode of the Misdirected Mark Podcast. Tonight, we welcome Mark Diaz-Truman to the show to talk about Magpie Games' latest Kickstarter, Cartel, and to discuss non-heroic RPGs. And with that, my name is Chris.
And I'm Phil.
And I'm Old Man Logan.
And we have a guest.
I'm Mark. Thanks, guys.
Welcome to the show, Mark. I hope you enjoyed that intro. Phil worked very hard on it.
You guys are hard, man. This is a rough podcast.
That's right. That's how we roll.
It's
some narcos here.
It's actually kind of problematic for me because like Kevin Lovecraft patrons us, and he's also the beard of the queen. Like,
I mean, listen. I mean, we got to send a serious enough message. We can't let Brett be pushing us around. And listen, he's pretty. I mean, we have watched him clean a gun while we've played games with him.
That's actually accurate. That happened.
That's happened. We can't.
You guys might want to stay away then.
Yeah.
Oh man.
It's too funny.
So I guess with that, I will start with our guest, Mark. What is going on?
Oh man, we just got back from the Gamma Trade Show, which is this industry convention that happens, I guess, now in Reno. This is my first year going, so we went and talked with industry people about publishing, and we're gently reminded that indie games is the smallest corner of the smallest corner of the smallest corner. So it was a very enlightening experience.
Yeah, because it's does Gamma does toys? They don't do video games though, right?
No, there's no video games. It's just tabletop.
It's just tabletop.
Yeah, I mean, but there's D&D.
So
you guys have heard of it.
Well, yeah, but beyond that, there's board games. So Asmodee was probably like everywhere because they probably own 70% of everything, right?
Yeah, like it was huge, right? And like, so we got back from Gamma on Friday. It's such a like actual people who work for the industry convention that it happens during the week, like it's not even on the weekend, right? And to discover that the Encyclopedia Draconica is finally here in the office. We'll be shipping copies of that, but it's like, oh look, this little game about dragons. This is beautiful. After seeing the giant D&D displays of and like you said, board games and miniatures and card games and all the stuff that people actually think of when they think of the tabletop industry. So
if it's Gamma, like, is it mostly the hobby board game industry, or is it is like Hasbro there too, like Pitch and Monopoly and Risk and things like that also?
It's hobby for sure. Like it's all about the retailers and what retailers are going to carry in their stores. I don't think there's a ton of buyers there from like Walmart and Target and stuff. But we actually got to talk to a couple really awesome retailers who sell our games. And hear from them about people who are playing little indie games at their store in Baltimore or Seattle or whatever. That was pretty neat, man. It was pretty cool to talk to some retailers who really know their stuff about indie games.
Yeah, that's super cool stuff, man. I love walking into game stores and looking around for to see what kind of role playing game stuff they have on the shelves. And more these days, you see more Fate and Powered by the Apocalypse and other stuff popping up on shelves, which is pretty nice.
I mean, I have to say I have a bias about that because, like, I walk into a game store, I immediately go to the role playing section, and then I'm like, okay, past the Pathfinder, past the D&D, past like whatever remnants of White Wolf they still have, and then I'm like, all right, what do you got on your shelf? Like, what have you bought? And then I have to admit, I'm pretty biased at that point if I don't see some signs of stuff that I like to play. I get kind of snobby about it.
Well, that was actually what was cool about we went to a panel on like how to do, basically the guy who was presenting it, and 4 indie books for like $50. Like you could make your role playing game section of your store completely awesome for like a fraction of what you would spend on one set of minis, right? So there's no excuse for not having a few indie games in your store. And Marissa and I were like, yes, thumbs up, please tell them that. Like, that's amazing, yes. Because like you said, it's hard when you show up to a role-playing game section and it's like, here's the
Oh, we are having some technical difficulties apparently with the connection.
It's a little Googling.
I will see what I can do about that. Sorry, everybody. Hey, Mark, you still there?
I'm still here. Yeah,
Sorry,
can you hear me?
we cut out a little. We dropped you for a bit there. Let me see if I can't fix our connection issues real quick. I know the perils of live podcasting.
I'll say, Mark, one of the things that we do around here, and we've done it for Fate, and we've been talking about doing it for Powered by the Apocalypse, is that there's a guy in town who actually runs a Day of Fate once a month, where he runs it at a local gaming store, and he gets GMs to come in and run all different flavors of Fate, and people come in who've either played a bunch of Fate or never played Fate and kind of get a taste for it. And a number of us have been kind of kicking around locally that we should do the same thing for Powered by the Apocalypse, that we should just do like a Day of the Apocalypse or something, like once a month. Start bringing, just start giving people some exposure to, a couple different Powered by the Apocalypse games.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's what's cool about PBTA, right? Is like once you get started, you can pick up the next game really fast. So you don't have that big load time that you have for like, here's an indie game with brand new mechanics that you've never seen before every time you pick up a new game.
And just the whole conversation thing where it's like, okay, look, you've never played before? Great. We're just going to have a conversation, and every now and then I'm going to tell you, pick up the dice and roll and look at this sheet.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be great.
It's so easy to teach a person who's never role played before how to play Powered by the Apocalypse games. Like, talk and I'll tell you when it's time to roll. And by an hour in, they're like, now? And you're like, yes, totally, roll. It's perfect. Yeah, great.
Yep.
Do you want to tell folks about Encyclopedia Draconica?
Yeah, sure. So the Encyclopedia Draconica is the supplement for Epillion, which is Marissa's game of baby dragons, friendship, and magic. It's sort of like if My Little Pony met Spyro, met Lord of the Rings. And so the Draconica has just a ton of awesome articles in it. I mean, it's got Emily Care-Boss, Aja George, John Wick, Cam Banks, Jason Morningstar, Eddie Webb, Adam Koval. Like, there's so many cool pieces in here, and 4 new playbooks for Epillion, including the Elementalist, who can like summon golems and constructs to help fight the darkness. And my personal favorite, which Sarah wrote, our fellow Magpie, the Orphan, who's a dragon driven by destiny. We realized halfway through the Orphan is basically Hellboy. Nice. You've been abandoned by your house, but you have an important role to play in Draconia. So
that's amazing.
But yeah, this will be on our web store and in stores like early next month. Like, it'll go out to backers first in the next week or so, hopefully, and then after that, it'll be up on our store.
Man, Epillion's I actually own Epillion with all the crystals and gems and everything like that. I have the whole set of it. Like, I still haven't gotten it to the table yet. I've had it for like 2.5 years. Like, it's that game and Threadbare are the 2 games that I want to play really badly still that are Powered by the Apocalypse games.
See, we need a Day of the Apocalypse.
I know, right? Just so I can bust out Epillion and then my Winnie the Pooh Threadbare hack. So there's that.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Oh man. And plus, you could bring like little stuffed dragons to the table for Epillion. They're so adorable.
That would let me do my my Cthulhu the Warren hack.
There you go. That's right.
Where they find they find, so it takes place in Massachusetts, and the Warren, while they're digging tunnels, they find a weird statue and it starts speaking to them.
So you're still playing bunnies, right?
Oh, you're still playing the Warren,
Yeah.
except that it's slowly corrupting you along the way.
That's perfect.
I'm gonna move on to Bob. What's going on with you?
Yeah, it's a couple of days after Breakout finished, man. So there will be some Breakout talk later. But I haven't really had a huge problem with con drop over the years with years and years of going to Gen Con. It was like mostly just I don't want to go back to work. But this time I got home and I was like, oh my God, I'm dragging. I'm so tired. Bam, out. I crashed for like 3 hours, got up, spent the rest of the evening yesterday, and then went to bed at like 11:15, had a solid 7 hours of sleep, got up and went to work today. And I was like, I actually feel much better now that I got some real sleep. So luckily I didn't have it was just the sleep depth version of con drop. So once I got sleep, I got over it. But yeah, Breakout was fun, good time, and we're going to talk about that a little later.
Yeah.
So Phil, hey man, what about you?
Same thing, man. I did Breakout all weekend with you guys. I definitely had con drop. I was dragging, and I had to go to work yesterday. So
Yeah, me too.
I had to go and run an 11-person meeting. So like I walked in the door, I hadn't shaved. I just like walked in the door and I was like, listen, I have the equivalent of a gaming hangover. I'm like, are you guys ready to start this meeting? And I just like plowed through the day, which worked. I pulled it off. But I was dying. Like I was at my desk. I was just like, I felt like I was wearing like a lead jacket all day. But it was amazing. It was such a, Kate, Rob, and Rachel ran such an amazing con that I was blown away about like how good it was.
It was very good. Yes. And that's the same for me. Like Breakout, that's what I did for like 5 days. Got ready for it.
Con's not actually 5 days.
No,
No.
it's
Although it
really
needs to be 4. Like that's like my only feedback will be like you have to start on Thursday now. Like it's too good to start this on Friday morning.
All right.
Yeah, we do New Mexicon here, which is our little baby IndieCon, and like basically it starts Thursday night. Like people show up and play board games, and then by Friday morning, everybody's like, "Where are the pickup games?" before the official schedule on Friday night.
Oh, so I got to ask you because I know somebody who's coming to New Mexicon. Do you know?
Awesome.
Do you know Camden Wright?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Camden. I don't think we've ever met like physically in person, but Camden was one of the winners of the Indie Game Developer Network Scholarship this year. So I talked with him about setting that up. I wasn't able to go to Metatopia, but I was really thrilled to see him win the scholarship. It was great.
So I'm gonna give you my recommendation. Find Camden and play in his game, the one that he brought to Metatopia, One Child's Heart.
Okay.
Oof. I that's all I'm gonna say is like, wow. Do that.
That's awesome. We have a mustering system here where people pitch their games and then you kind of like bid to get into a game. So I will see what I can do. Maybe even like bribe somebody.
There you go.
Nice.
All right, let's do a few announcements before we move on to the rest of the show. The Misdirected Mark is we're gonna have a get together on April 8th during and after the QCC kickoff party. So that's the day that the Kickstarter goes live. We are going to be gaming from 2 till 6 at Collectors Inn in Kenmore, and then doing dinner at the Gypsy Parlor afterwards at around 6:30. So if folks want to join us, you can let me know by emailing me at mmp@misdirectedmark.com. Just put Kickstarter party in the subject line, and that will let me know that, and then let me know that you want to join us for dinner, or if you want to come play a game with us, or something like that.
Cool.
2 to 6, huh?
Yes, you already said you were coming.
Yeah. No, I'm coming. I just think I'm gonna bring. I think I'm gonna bring Turning Point.
Nice. All right, what are we talking about now, Phil?
Well, since we have Mark on, and we're going to be in the garage in a little bit talking about non-heroic games, thought we'd give Mark a few minutes to actually introduce Cartel and the Cartel Kickstarter. So, Mark, why don't you start off, just kind of tell everyone what Cartel is, and then kind of run us through, the points of the Kickstarter.
Awesome. Yeah. So Cartel is my game of Mexican narco fiction powered by the apocalypse. So it takes the engine of apocalypse world and it applies it to the sort of genre of Narcos, El Mariachi, and The Wire, and Breaking Bad, right? So rather than playing people in a post-apocalyptic landscape, you're playing people caught up in the Mexican drug war. And most of those people are actually directly involved in what is known as the Sinaloa drug cartel, which is one of the oldest drug trafficking organizations in the world. So the game is set in 2007. It's not actually set in the modern day. It's set 10 years ago. And that was because that moment in time was when the Mexican government went from tolerating the cartels to, quote, like dropping the hammer on them.
Google lag.
Google lag. Not much I could do about
That's
it.
good. Mark will be back.
That's unfortunate. It's the problem with guests.
It's a problem with Google.
It is the problem.
Hello,
with Google.
hello?
Hi,
There he is.
you're back. There you go. Sorry about that. I have no idea why it's doing that.
Yeah, no problem. So like I was saying, the game set in 2007, and that's the time where the Mexican government was going to drop the hammer on the cartels. And the idea was that they were going to wrap this up really quick and the cartels would be broken and order would be restored. And 10 years later, not so much. Like the cartels proved to be very resilient. So you all, the players, play people who are caught up in the cartel. Some people are El Narco, like the big boss. Some people are a dirty police officer or a halcon, like a sort of low-level runner. And the goal is to kind of get at something like The Wire, right, where you see the full spread of the drug war from the inside out. And it's not about like glorifying violence or, I don't know, like talking about how great drugs are. Like it's kind of the opposite. Like there's no better condemnation of life on the street than actually having to make these sort of terrible choices that people have to grapple with when they actually work in the drug supply chain.
Yeah, that was a thing that happened when we played it. Like a while ago. It was a while ago, but like there were all those difficult choices to make about how to deal with these situations.
Exactly, right. So the goal of the game is to put people in the shoes of like quote unquote ordinary Mexicans, like people who are struggling to find a way forward in terrible situations. Sometimes, like that's a terrible situation of their own design. Like they thought they'd get ahead by living life this way. Sometimes it's because they have no better option. And I think one of the most powerful questions as a GM that I ask at the beginning of every game is, why do you do this? Right. And it's a question that like you don't often ask in like Urban Shadows. You're not like, so why are you a werewolf? Like why did you choose this to be a werewolf? A lot of times you're like, I'm just a werewolf. That's how I was born. And you're like, great, cool, moving on. But here at some level, everybody's chosen this life, even if it was the best of all the terrible choices that you had. And so the goal of the Kickstarter is for us to make Cartel, which is like my dream project. I've spent 5 years trying to figure out, how do I tell stories about Mexican-American culture and Mexican culture in a way that's compelling and moving for gamers? We want to make this game awesome. And we have a really great blueprint for that in Bluebird's Bride. Marissa and Strix and Sarah just produced a beautiful book, 8x8 hardcover, gold foil. And I looked at that book and I was like, oh my God, this is how I want to make Cartel. I don't want it to be some like the ash can that I published in 2015 is beautiful as an ash can. I'm super excited about it, but I don't want this just to be a book you kind of throw on your shelf right next to like, Urban Shadows and Undying. I want it to be a game that you like are like, wow, this book is its own thing. So we've been working with some amazing artists. Andrew Thompson, who's a comic book artist, he's done some amazing covers for the game. Mirko Pagnesi has done some amazing playbooks. And then my sort of co-developer, Miguel Angel Espinosa, has been doing some amazing graphic design. So he helped me lay out the quick start. He helped lay out the mock-ups you see on the Kickstarter page. But our goal is to produce a book that is like captures the vibrancy of Mexican culture in the book and really shows what the whole feeling of it is supposed to be on every page.
I have the ash can because I bought it at Gen Con. What was it? Is that 2015, 2016 when the ash can came out?
God,
I think it was 2015.
Yeah.
Actually, it's been a really long time.
It was 2015. I bought the ash can and I loved it. And then I remember when you guys released the quick start, just like like a couple months ago, I was blown away by the artwork. Like it was just because it was so different. Because the ash can, obviously, you just throw together to get it out there. But like when you finally see the layout and and just the art direction, like even just for each of the playbooks, like I was like, wow, I'm like, you're killing me with this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm really lucky to have an amazing team. I mean, Marissa is one of the best art directors in the whole industry, and she brings such an eye to making these things pop. I'll say something like, yeah, I want there to be like a narco, and I want him to look like really sad, but also like he's won everything and he's still sad. And she's like, great. And she turns that into the cover, and I'm like, that was exactly what I wanted. Yes, even better than what I wanted. That's amazing. And the Calavera art, the Sugar Skull art for the playbooks, I wanted a way for players to not see those as like the only characters, right? Like not see the playbook as, oh, this is what my character looks like. And the Calavera art has helped us, I think, bridge the gap between the sort of, like you said, vibrancy of Mexican culture and letting players kind of still contribute their own perspective on what their character looks like and sounds like and does.
That's really cool.
I mean, the sugar skulls are great anyway, right? Like what a wonderful image to have on those playbooks.
Oh, I love them.
So why don't you tell us about the Kickstarter itself? Like, why don't you tell us what like you just hit $30,000 as of this recording earlier today? I think I saw that pop up. What is the next stretch goal that is on the way, and what are you looking forward to as far as like your like stretch goals that you really want to get to?
Yeah, so the first thing is we've hit a bunch of cool stretch goals that have added new playbooks. I really love new playbooks. It's a way to expand the game, especially for Cartel, because every playbook kind of brings with them a section of the story.
Every playbook brings up a section of the story.
Yep.
I know. That's the last place. Sorry, everybody. That's just what happens sometimes with when you have guests.
We are stretching across the country. To
Yeah,
make this
we are.
connection.
Yeah, that's true. Usually, it's not this problematic.
I sometimes get this with Senda when we're recording Pandas.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get nights where like the Google like stretches out.
Should I step out and come back in, or?
No. I'm gonna try something a little different real quick. Actually, if you would actually jump out for a second, I'm gonna try something else.
So I will. You do that. I'll talk to the rest of the show in the chat room, and so some of the I think the playbook that I recently saw that got unlocked, I think a week or two ago, that I am ecstatic about is the Lawyer. I think that modeled a little bit on Saul from Breaking Bad, and
Hey, Mark, can you hear us?
Yeah, totally.
so
Can you hear him?
yeah, got him right here.
Yeah.
What are you running him through now?
My phone.
Oh, because your phone sometimes tends to be better behaved than.
Correct.
Awesome.
So
Okay.
as long as you can hear us all, then it'll work just fine.
Yeah, I'm good, man. Yeah.
Yeah, this is actually even a more solid sound.
Yes, it is.
perfect.
Good.
That's awesome.
So, Mark, I was.
Phil,
Okay, good. Then you did hear me
Phil was
talk
talking
about the Lawyer.
the Alba Gangster. Yeah, if those of you are familiar with the indie industry, I have a good friend named Jason Corley who goes by JD Corley on the internet, and he's like a long time indie gamer / troll, like good troll, like friendly troll. And I like when I was writing and working on the game, I really wanted to create a lawyer playbook because he's a lawyer in real life, and I just knew like he would get such a kick out of it. And when I was talking with Miguel, our consultant, he was like, "Oh, it's an Abo Gangsta," and I was like, "Oh my god, there's a word for it." And he's like, "Oh yeah, like this is totally a thing with the cartels." So yeah, like based a little bit on Saul, but also on like Tom Hagen from Godfather, right? Like you're the character whose job is to make sure that the law never really catches up with you, right? Like never really pays the price. But you're not really one of them either, right? Like you're not really a narco in the same way. You're vulnerable because you have to maintain some contacts with regular society, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm super pumped about that playbook. And the same for the one we just unlocked, which is La Esperanzada. When I saw Sicario, I was like, oh my God, I want to have a character who like wants to do the right thing. Like how perfect is that they want to be the hero, and how the game will thwart them at every turn. So it's like, I'm really excited about this idea of somebody sitting down to play Cartel and being like, no, I'm the good guy. Like I'm determined to do what's right. And sometimes you'll win because Ruben Blades in Once Upon a Time in Mexico, like gets his man, so sometimes you win. But the drug war is bigger than you. And I think that's a great playbook for showing how that actually happens.
So the thing I love about extra playbooks in games like this is like you have your base set of playbooks that you bring to in the game book, which tell a specific kind of story. But as soon as you add other playbooks, it's almost like you're changing the nature of the game in some way, shape, or form, because you can tell different stories because all those stories bring different moves, which then change how the game ends up being played in a lot of ways.
Totally, and it's doubly true for Cartel because of the way that I structured the cultural influences. So in a lot of games, like if you play a werewolf in Urban Shadows, then there will be more werewolves, I guess. But there might have been werewolves anyway, because that's kind of up to the GM. But with the playbooks in Cartel, each one brings with them an arena of the conflict, right? So if somebody plays El Narco, suddenly the whole plaza is kind of in play, like the entire area and what that area does and how that area makes money. But if you bring El Lava Gangster, then all of a sudden the legal side is in play. There really probably wasn't really in play before. And so each playbook brings with them a slice of the drug war. And that's how we think about each one. That's why there's only one playbook that's a white dude. Like
Nice.
El Güero.
I mean, and that's the way it should be, right? Like,
Yeah, you play the CIA agent, right? Like, and you're like Johnny Depp or the guy in American Made, Tom Cruise in American Made. Like, you're not really a great guy. Like,
I think I just
like,
saw. Did I see a sequel for Sicario? Because I just saw a
yeah.
Because that had the CIA agent in it, and that guy's awful. Like,
Dude, Josh Brolin is the worst in Sicario.
Oh.
The new Sicario is called Day of the Soldado. It was originally just called Soldado, which means soldier, but I think that was confusing for folks, so now they've changed the name. And they just released a new trailer, which I have not even yet had time to watch.
I watched
it.
It's amazing.
Is it good?
Yeah, it's
okay. Awesome.
It will not disappoint. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Josh Brolin's a huge influence for that playbook too. Like, it's perfect. But upcoming stretch goals, the next one on the list after the 30,000 is El Tahur, who's the gambler. And the goal with the gambler is to have a playbook who's caught up in the cartel's like business, like he owes them money, but is not actually that caught up with the rest. Like, he doesn't want to be in the drug trade, but for one reason or another, he owes money to the wrong people.
I mean, you got to pay this debt off, right? Like,
you got to pay it off. Exactly. Yeah. So I'm thinking about characters like Worm in Rounders, who's just like this slimy, like, trying to get out of trouble guy, or Alex Freed from The Gambler, played by James Caan, who's amazing, right? In The Gambler. And the next playbook, which I'll just sort of hint at here, we haven't announced yet, will be we're gonna bring it home, baby, all the way home. It's gonna be La Mariachi.
Nice. Oh my God.
Right. So there's two things I love about La Mariachi that we've worked already for the playbook. The first one is one of La Mariachi's enlaces, like one of her ties, is that she looks like another character. So people will confuse the mariachi for another character, and you get to choose who it is.
That's awesome.
It could be that they confuse you for the Sicaria. It could be they confuse you for El Narco, right? But you will always get mixed up with somebody else.
That's
and
awesome.
Then two, someone, another PC, probably, it could be an NPC, has killed someone you love. And you have not yet taken your revenge.
Of course.
So you're totally set up to get like all personally mixed up in it, as opposed to the gambler who, right, is only professionally mixed up in the cartel. But like the El Mariachi is like totally caught up in the drama of everything that's swirling around.
I'm not against all of you. I'm just.
What's in the guitar case? My guitar.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So we're gonna bring it all the way home. I mean, because El Mariachi, I remember watching El Mariachi when I was a kid, and my mom showing it to me and being like, "Yes, like that looks like." It looks like my people. It's like this kind of stories that it just clicked with me in this huge way as like this little Mexican-American kid in New Mexico. Like that, the whole thing looks like a town in New Mexico. Like it was such a breath of fresh air, and it's been a huge inspiration to Cartel. So I'm really excited to bring that back to close it out. And that'll probably be our last playbook.
I mean, those two moves alone, just looking like someone else, and your love has been killed. It's so perfectly fueled for trouble. Although now that Bob said it, like I feel like a move like it, the guitar case. Like what's in the case?
What's in the case?
Yeah, right. I think there's one of the tensions of Cartel is always like putting people in enough trouble that there's stuff to do, but not so much trouble that they get killed in like the first scene.
Right.
So like, yeah, there's got to be a move for like a La Rata to avoid being found out. There's got to be a move for La Mariachi to not be caught with all the weapons right away, right? So that's our challenge as designers here is to figure out how do we put you in just the right amount of trouble, not too much, not too little, to make for a really satisfying session of gaming.
Nice.
So what are some of your favorite backer levels for this game? Like, of course, there's like you get the game, get a book, all that stuff. But like, what are some of the cooler things that you have, if you have any of them?
Okay, number one, above all others, is absolutely the La Reina del Pacifico backer level, because this is like almost too much. We will write a narco corrido for your character.
It's amazing.
Right. So we're doing 4 narco corridos that are specific to our fictional Durango. And part of that's because, again, like this is about real people and we're sensitive to that. And I think just sending people to narco corridos is at some level kind of like,
So
yeah, like go listen to these gangster rap songs. But we wanted to create some of our own stuff and give you a sense of the table of what it would look like.
Mark, I was going to pause you for a second for people who might not be familiar with cartel or narco corridos. If you wanted to just briefly tell people what those are. I know what it is, but just
yeah, sorry, I totally forget sometimes that you like I start talking about cartel and I forget people have not like simmered in the drug war for a decade. So narco corridos are basically the music of narco culture, and they're heavily criticized, just like gangster rap here in the States, right? Like the idea is they're songs about the drug life. Their songs often have a really specific moral, oftentimes one that's actually kind of traditional, like the people who lie get killed, the people who are trustworthy live. And they're set to like almost like traditional Mexican music. So it's a little bit like if Snoop Dogg collaborated with like John Philip Sousa, right? Like they have a really unique sound, and you have to kind of really listen to them to get it. Los Tigres del Norte is one of the most famous ones. And of course they have, La Reina song that is kind of a nod to that particular pledge level. It's beautiful and amazing, but also just like completely over the top. And so narco corridos are these like what are literally like story songs, corridos, but for the drug war. And so we're going to write one of those for anybody who backs at that level. And it'll be like, you tell us about your character. Like, were you a sicario, meaning like an enforcer, hitman? Were you el narco? Were you La Mariachi, right? And you tell us about your character, and we're going to write a song for you in Spanish with a full kind of like, the accompaniment and everything. And it'll go on the soundtrack, Corridos de Durango.
Oh my Lord, that's amazing. Where are you recording?
Yeah,
where are you going to record these?
Well, so my buddy Justin, who's one of the people that helped me develop the game, like he was the original editor for the Ashcan, and he's a big fan of crime fiction. He's been my singer-songwriter partner for like 15 years. Like we used to be in a band in college and stuff. So,
nice.
So he's going to be the primary writer. I'm going to help him with the lyrics and stuff as well. And then we're going to record him at a local place here in Albuquerque. And part of kind of like how much we fund is like, well, how nice are we going to like have a full backing band? Like we'll see what we can actually work out. But I'm really excited about having this soundtrack that you can play during your game. That's like for Durango especially.
Yeah, because recording studio time is not cheap.
Yeah, and we're gonna do it. I mean, it's not gonna be like we're not gonna have a backing band of 15 people to do it.
No, of course not. But even like it's just that running the time in the studio is usually not cheap. I mean, I was a musician in college. Like I went to school for music performance. I gigged out a lot. I recorded a couple of discs myself. So I mean, like I know how much it costs to go in the studio, and that was a decade ago.
Yeah, and that's why we're only doing 4 songs, right? So
yeah, that makes sense.
we're not going to do a whole album yet. Narco Corridos.
I will say you can find for background music for your games. You can find them on Google Music.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's tons of them, and they're actually like illegal in some states. I mean, when people say this is controversial, like they need to understand, like there are places in Mexico you will be arrested for playing narco corridos, right? Like that's like they're a serious thing. But the other cool thing we're doing, this is something that I've really loved to do for like special pledge levels. We have a pledge level called El Narco, that's the $150 level, and it just comes with everything. So you get like the books, you get like a special edition book that we're doing that has a sugar skull on the cover that I think is really awesome. And then you get a bunch of cool extra exclusives. Like we're doing Santos candles with the character play from the playbooks. We're doing fake candy meth from the person who did all the meth for Breaking Bad.
Nice.
Because obviously Breaking Bad is filmed here in Albuquerque. The woman who did all the meth for it offered to do some candy meth for us. And of course, like I said, a cartel dice and a bunch of temporary tattoos that Miguel designed for us. And now a cloth map of Durango. So you'll actually be able to like lay it out at the table. So yeah, I'm really excited about that pledge level because Kickstarter lets me do some stuff that like, I can't imagine trying to send like Santos candles into retail. Like that's just not.
So Phil,
it's not going to work.
That's your backer level, right?
Oh, not yet. It isn't.
I mean, the candy skull cover, the candy meth, candles.
I know.
Oh man, that sounds like it's right up your alley, bro.
I got a plan. I'm already backed in. I think at 50, but I know I have whatchamacallit? I know I have a royalty payment coming in April.
There you go.
So I'm like, well, not exactly done pledging. I had to get in somewhere. Like I had to, I got in at 50 because I wanted to make sure I got some good stuff. But I don't think I'm done yet.
Yeah. The last reward level I'll talk about is they let us name reward levels now, which is a thing we've been doing for a long time, but it's official, right? So it's like clearly listed. And when we did the retailer level, we were like, oh yeah, we'll just name it El Traficante. So all the retailers are backed at the El Traficante level, which has like an add-on thrown in, like as our life for you, amigo. Like it's just the best for you, so, since you're a supplier and all.
It's awesome.
There you go. That's funny. I love it.
It sounds amazing. The cool part is that if you're curious, the quick start is available on drive-thru. Like you don't even have to wonder what this game is going to be like or what it's going to look like because you can go test drive it right now.
And we will have a link in the show notes to that. Bob, can you remind me in the
Absolutely.
notes to put a link in the show notes because it's not in there?
For us, that's also about addressing issues that have come up around whether or not this is a game that like we should even be making, right? And I think that a lot of times when I talk about it, like I'm excited about crime fiction. I love Mexican culture. Like this is all those things coming together. But it's also with an understanding that like I want you to read this thing and figure out if it's for you. It's not for everybody. Like it's not. And part of our discussion tonight is about like how am I trying to make this game so that you're not playing heroes, but you're also maybe not playing villains. And the quick start is part of that. It's about having a discussion about it. So, please download it, check it out, read it, see what we're doing. It's a really unique thing, and it's one of the reasons I'm excited to be working on it.
All right, now we're going to take a very short break to do an ad from one of our sponsors. Conjure Hagelas is a role-playing game about explorers, investigators, and espionage agents in a supernatural fantasy world. Halfway between traditional games and the narrative powered by the Apocalypse games, this is a great on-ramp for those seeking to try out more traditional or more narrative-style play. You want to play a sorcerer, a kitsune, or a druid? Well, we got them. How about an orc, cryomancer, or satyr? We got those too. As your characters investigate the underworld, explore astral space, and undertake espionage on the many moons, you create an interactive story with the other players. Conjure Hagelas encourages group storytelling in a fantasy world called Rikirta via the Fate Weave, a way to link character goals, motivations, and life events. Each character has a virtue and a vice, and you get experience points if you roleplay them and which allows you to regenerate your mana quicker. You also share a vice with one contact and a virtue with your other contact to help make those connections in the world. Also, everyone in the game starts with a portal moon power, allowing you to portal to magic zones like temples and arcane guilds, which puts exploring fantastic locations available to the players right away. The game includes maps, creatures, spells, espionage moves, and guides to playing and running the game. Conjure Hagelas is now available at DriveThruRPG. Come for the sword chucks and stay for the astral plane.
I love that. Come for the sword chucks.
I know, right? Stay for the astral plane. No.
That's pretty solid.
Access granted.
And we're in the garage, which we are going to talk about. Phil, you want to help me out here while I'm trying to pull up the notes again because I have to switch around all the time.
So with Mark here tonight, we always love to have the designer that we're interviewing for the night talk about a design aspect of their game. Because we love to nerd out about design stuff here, and so we wanted to pick something really relevant to Cartel. And something that actually I know Chris struggles with in games.
It's not really struggle with. It's just I don't care to play games often that are non-heroic in nature.
I know. So tonight we're going to dig in and talk about non-heroic games because I think that's something very key to Cartel.
It completely is. So, like in 288, that was December 2017, we did a workshop about evil games, which we focused more on GMing advice for when you run your evil games. And there will be some unavoidable overlap in this conversation, but we're going to, do what Phil said, talk about designing and how to design this kind of stuff into your games and make it dramatic and interesting. So before we get into asking Mark a few questions, let's do a refresher on heroic games, and by way of that, a contrast for there's a contrast for non-heroic games.
Yeah. So, let's, break out the dictionary. Heroic, a person who is admired or idealized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities, right? So courage, doesn't run away. They're brave in the face of danger. Outstanding achievements, that's like doing good deeds, protecting people, defending things. Noble qualities, so high moral principles and ideals. So non-heroic characters then kind of lack some or all of those qualities, right? So like our makeshift definition might be like a person who may lack courage and whose achievements or qualities are ignoble, right? Like just not heroic.
Correct.
Now this isn't to be confused with the anti-hero, right? Because the anti-hero is a protagonist who does heroic things. They don't display the normal conventions of a hero.
Sure.
Han Solo.
This is a perfectly, I suppose, good definition for this conversation. There's always been some debate about what the actual definition of anti-hero is.
Right, like, I mean, Wolverine is like an anti-hero.
No, there's like a complete definition of of the anti-hero in literature.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but that is perfectly fine.
But you're good for this one
for this
tonight?
one, yes.
Okay.
We are not going to have that discussion tonight.
Yep, no, that's fine. And we also want to, and this actually Mark brought up when we were putting the notes together, we also don't want to confuse this with outright villains. Right? Because the villains, the definition for villain is a cruelly malicious person who is involved or devoted to wickedness of crime or, some sort of scoundrel.
Yes.
And non-heroic is, like you could drift to that location, but you're not necessarily starting in that location.
Sure. Well, the vast
I mean, that's the thing, right? Is it's sort of like heroism as we have to be real that most people play games, I think, to escape stuff, to find some space in which they can be not them. And certainly, I've worked on books that are explicitly heroic. I'm literally looking at my copy of New World, which is the Mesoamerican book I developed for JWP and for 7th Sea. I mean, literally every single character is a hero with a capital A. We ask, who is your hero? We don't just, assume you're going to be a hero. We tell you your goal is to be a hero.
Yes, absolutely. I assume you're still there, Mark. We didn't drop you,
Yeah.
did we?
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Just like I'm saying, like that is the default for a lot of folks for sure. And we get out of that default and we end up in some really messy territory about what we're trying to accomplish.
I mean, let's talk about some games then that do the heroic thing. So like D&D based on the adventures is generally heroic because like we're pushing the player characters to go do heroic type things. The Warren is a heroic game.
Yeah, they're bunnies, man. Like, there's nothing bad about those bunnies. I can't think of a night. I mean, it's seriously like a fluffy game, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Masks, for all intents and purposes, is a heroic game, even though it's a lot about teenage angst.
I mean, it's Mark hasn't probably heard, but we played a pretty good run of Masks.
Yeah, we played like 12 or 13
awesome.
sessions.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, one of the things we get sometimes is a question like, what if my players don't want to be heroes? And we're like, don't play Masks?
Yeah.
Like, right? Like, that's the point. I mean, you might become a villain over the course, I guess, if you side with Magneto instead of Xavier, but like, seems like you should start from the position of being a hero.
Yes. I agree. And I mean, I think everything about that book leans that way. Like the art, the artwork, all the playbooks, like everything leans heavily on it. Yeah, actually, that was. We loved that. Like we had a really great run of playing Masks, so we had a lot of fun.
I wish we could play a third series of it because I actually think I know how to run that game now.
Yeah, I'm good. I mean,
at some point
when you're ready,
we're playing Urban Shadows right now, so.
Mark's cool, right? Mark's okay. We just keep
talking about his games. We're just playing Magpie games. We might have been playing a lot of Magpie games this year so far.
That's great.
What's next?
So then, our next bucket is the anti-hero games. Knights Black Agents is very much anti-hero because you are ultimately fighting the vampires.
I mean, I feel like you're
Splitting hairs on that
yeah,
one?
that's a splitting hair one.
I don't know. I mean, you're not good people. I mean, by default, your characters are not good people in Night's Black Agents. You almost always play some black ops, like, cut out, or somebody who's been burned and dropped out of the scene.
So Bourne's an anti-hero?
Bourne's, I mean, technically, yes, Bourne's an anti-hero. He gets to be heroic by the fact that he has amnesia and doesn't actually remember who Jason Bourne was, because that's the thing he's confronted with at the end of the first movie, is that, the thing that really startled, if we're going to get deep for a second, the thing that throws him off is when he's confronted at the end, he's told, like, no, you planned the op. You told us what was going to happen.
Yeah, or you chose this in general.
Yeah,
right? Like he chose everything.
Right, and at the end of the third movie, you discover that he signed up for the program.
Yep.
So he's definitely an anti-hero. Just that he gets to be a hero by way of the amnesia basically lets him have a different life.
It's a very I would call it not very heroic. Like those stories about characters who are working for their governments doing
the super soldier mythology.
Yeah, right. That's not necessarily a heroic story.
No, and Treadstone is not a Treadstone is, Treadstone and Blackbriar are very bad things that wrap themselves up in a flag and state that they're doing good things while they're like being completely terrible.
And Outcome.
Oh yeah, Outcome from the lesser of the Bourne.
The next two are to me are much more cut and dry.
Corporation, that game, you are not.
You're not heroes.
It might even fall into the third category depending on how you're playing that game. But you can definitely be anti-heroes in Corporation. And then lastly, Necessary Evil, the setting book from Savage Worlds.
You're the lesser evil fighting the bigger evil.
Well, do you remember the premise of it?
It's exactly what I said.
Exactly, right.
Atlanteans rise up and invade the Earth, and you are a bunch of villains because all the superheroes got wiped out. So, like, go fight the Atlanteans, who are a worse evil than you are.
Right. So suddenly you are heroes, right? Like,
well, it's either that or die.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then finally, there are the games where the characters are villains, maybe.
Let Mark kind of slide into this part.
Hey, Mark, what games have villains? Where are we playing villains?
Oh, I mean, so we talked about Blades in the Dark when we were preparing, right? This idea that you're playing criminals, and those criminals are, for varying degrees of willing to do bad things, right?
Uh-huh.
You can't really start by saying, like, I'm not really a criminal, because, like, that's going to fall apart within 30 seconds of the game. Right, because you are going to do an op, you're going to rob some people, murder some people, whatever you're going to do, and the game doesn't give you any sort of cushion on that. You're not robbing a bunch of people who got their goods illicitly. Like, that's not the premise of the game.
And also, right? I was going to say also, like, the premise of the game is a power grab. You're basically power grabbing constantly to move up this ladder.
Right, exactly. And the game. So this is why I take issue with villains, right? Because, like, you're villains in the sense that you are doing things that are illegal, but Blades puts forward very much the same idea of The Wire, which is, what is legality? How does it interact with reality? Do they actually match up at all, right? And I think Urban Shadows honestly is in the same space, right? Like, if you're a wizard and you kill somebody because you're a wizard and that person attacked you, like, what were you going to do? Go to the cops? Be like, yeah, this guy who was possessed by a demon tried to kill me, so I killed him first. Like, could you please intervene? Like, it's not reasonable. Like, there's no right? So, like, at the core of Urban Shadows and Blades is kind of a metaphor for what it means to live in a world without clear morality, right? So the idea of playing villains rankles me a little bit, because it's like, well, but who is doing the deciding there about what villainy is? And I think Cartel falls into the same space, right? Where the idea of heroism is very much a reflection of a certain kind of viewpoint about the potential for heroism, meaning that such choices are always possible.
So there's this thing that that comes to mind, and I always wind up referring to it as the hidden world, but it's one of the things I love. It's actually one of the things I love about, like, Narcos and other crime dramas, and as well as what kind of gets me for urban fantasy, is this idea that there's our world, but just tucked underneath it in these like little weird spaces is this other world that operates like on a completely different set of rules.
Yes.
You know, like, hey, that warehouse isn't just a warehouse. You know, that warehouse is like the major distribution hub, you know,
Right.
You know, for some sort of, transport of cocaine across a border.
Yeah, I mean, I love modern fantasy, urban fantasy. Like, I'm a huge Dresden Files fan, and like one of the big themes of that game or that series of stories, and then consequently the games that go along with it, is like who polices this magical world, right? And that is generally the White Council in a lot of ways, or these accords that are set up by the Queen of Air and Darkness, and they're laws in as much like this is how we behave politely, so it's not all out chaos. And for magic, it's like we just kill people who use black magic because if we don't, they are actually altered by the magic that they're using to become worse and worse and worse, and then driven by compulsions. So I mean, like. Those are completely different law structures for reasons in that world. So really finding, and to me that is like, you need to find your law structure for whatever your society is, and then you decide what is good and evil there, which is why when we played Cartel, I found it fascinating because like, yeah, we weren't necessarily good people, but there was a reason that we tended to do things. Like we had values, we had beliefs, we had things that were important to us, and we also had like a societal norm that we were trying to keep together.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's the key, right? Is that norm?
Yes.
Is the idea that there is some stability in the world that might be preserved by behaving in sort of pro-social ways, right?
Absolutely.
So like, apparently, I'm just going to spoil tons of stuff on this podcast, but we're doing more Urban Shadow stuff in the next year.
Yes.
And one of the things we're doing is doing new playbooks, and one of the new power playbooks will be the Knight. And the Knight is somebody who is tasked with maintaining the order of a thing, and they get to make some choices about what that thing is. But it's because I'm fascinated with this question. Like, okay, you work for the Wizards Council. Wizards Council says X, Y, and Z is bad. Then you meet a wizard doing X, Y, and Z. You gonna pull the trigger? You gonna do it? because it doesn't seem to me so simple to say what is good and evil when power gets involved. And that's ultimately what a lot of these things are about, right? In Blades, if you're a tier 5 organization and you're robbing somebody, my guess is you're probably the villains. If you're a tier 0 organization and you're robbing somebody,
you're Robin Hood,
right?
Maybe. Or you come back to the old Dark Knight line, right? You live long enough to become the villain, right? You either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain. And so this whole question of whether the anti-heroes or the non-heroes lack courage is really interesting to me, because I feel like the core of all these games is sort of like, do you have the courage to do what's right when it's really going to cost you?
Yes.
Right. And Cartel asked that question a ton.
Yeah. And I think that's great, right? Like, because there are certain other games, like the Dresden File games tend to move this way, and games that model that kind of play. It's like, are you willing to pay the personal cost or even the outside cost to do the right thing, or will you take the quick and easy path and do the wrong thing, but succeed at what you want and take the corruption that goes along with that? Which is Urban Shadows in a nutshell. Like, so I mean, whatever. Like, totally. I just described Urban Shadows, which is like there's so many parallels to it, which is why I love that game so much.
And they're coming from different sides, right? Like Urban Shadows is you're good people who might fall to darkness, and Cartel is like you are, quote, bad people who might rise to greatness. Right. Who gets revenge on El Narco, who puts him to justice, or you might be the person who becomes him.
I mean, that's actually what happened in our when we played the Ashcan, was that our drug cook got killed in a hit, and everything came flying apart, and it all came down on the narco because he was ultimately responsible for all of it. And yeah, the game, like in that third act, kind of quickly turned.
Who is suffocated by his wife in bed while he was trying to recover.
Yes.
Only because I didn't roll that good enough.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah, the Sicario didn't quite. Oh no, you shot him.
Oh, I shot him.
He rolled high enough, and we'll talk about this when we get into the mechanics in a second.
Yeah.
He rolled high enough to live.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's beautiful. And then smothered in his bed by his wife.
Yeah, and the wife was one of the other player characters too.
It was great.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
So justice was done.
Yeah.
So, like, who knows? For some definition of justice.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's really the interesting thing about like that whole second world concept is that the second world operates on a different set of laws.
Yeah.
And that they run often counter to ours, but I know, like, you know, I'll be watching Narcos and somebody will do something and you'll be like, like, well, that guy's
dead.
right. That guy's that's not what you say to Pablo. Like,
Yeah.
nope. Like,
Well, Vampire had the Masquerade, right?
Vampire the Masquerade, I mean, that was part of the laws, but I mean, you were in more trouble in Vampire, like if you just if you broke protocol and offended like a more like an older vampire.
Sure. I mean, there's
Yeah,
that too.
Vampire's high school, right? I mean, it's the high school of the damned.
Yeah, right. That's about right.
High School of the
What we're honestly talking around a little bit here is you're talking about non-white spaces,
Yes.
right? I mean that's the thing about these games, right? Is that at some level, Blade simulates poverty.
Yeah. Huh.
Like, you are tier 0, you have 0 coin and 0 rep. What do you do? And it's like, well, I can't fucking do anything. You're like, correct.
Right.
Yes, you are correct.
So I better go rob somebody.
I'm gonna
or
go
do a
take
job,
something
do
from
something
you.
illegal to get it, right? Like, and that's generally what happens. Like I'm gonna.
And so part of the reason that I set Cartel in Mexico, right, is this sense of there are all these stories that are told through metaphor to get there. Like, oh yeah, we're all werewolves, we're all vampires, we're all whatever. And they sometimes get at the heart of that experience. But when you watch The Wire, you get a sense of like the two sides of this coin. There's a way you behave in court and there's a way you behave on the street. Right. And what I want to get at is the way you behave on the street, and that sense where you're like, oh shit, that guy's dead. Like, he just broke a rule. That's a street rule. It's not a law. It's not easy.
Yep.
So you can't tell somebody about it, but they broke the rules
Mhm.
and they're done. Right. And that whole sense of being able to follow the rules within this society is what's key to making, I think, non-heroic games work.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, why don't we get to some questions from Mark about
already
this?
our intros kicking ass so far. Let's get to questions.
Hit it.
So Mark, I think we have up to this point we've touched on it in a few places, but I'm going to kind of have you kind of coalesce it into one answer. What inspired you to design a game about narco fiction?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing I answer a lot, I think, because people want to know, like, where did this game come from, right? And, you know, my experience growing up in New Mexico was definitely a kind of hidden minority experience. Like, I didn't really think I understood how different I was until I went to college, honestly. I went to Arizona State for college and was like, holy shit, all these white people are so mad about the Mexicans. What's going on? Like, where I'm from, there's much more complex kind of interactions. And it was at that moment that I started to realize, like, whoa, I grew up in a really strange place. Albuquerque kind of lives at the center of a lot of different cultures. And while it's not perfect, it does its best to kind of integrate them. And so when I started designing games, I had this realization like 2 or 3 games in where I was like, wait a second, if I got hit by a truck tomorrow, no one would know I was Mexican. Like, they would play the thing and they would play Our Last Best Hope and they'd be like, yeah, this guy wrote some games. They would never have a sense of my unique cultural perspective. And then I had another thought. I was like, oh my God, I don't really know what a Mexican game is. Is it like D&D with Mexicans? I don't know. And it took me like years to figure out something that I felt would connect my cultural experience to the kind of games I loved and the fiction I loved. And it was in the middle of watching Breaking Bad, where I was like, this is great. It's all about Albuquerque, but weirdly, it's like all about white people in Albuquerque, which I thought was really strange because there aren't a ton of them. I love Breaking Bad, but there's all these Latino characters at the sides, like Gomez and Tuco, and like all these Latino characters who exist at the fringes of the narrative. And it hit me like a bullet. I was like, what if they were the center of that narrative? And for me, that connected all those things I love. The Wire, New Mexico, and great game design. Like, PBTA was absolutely at that time where my head was. And it kind of took what Andrew and I did with Urban Shadows, adding race to the list of looks, right? And it kicked it up a whole notch to say, I want to challenge you to play a culture that's not your own.
So, are we gonna move on to the next question? Is that what we should do? Okay, cool. Just checking. Why didn't you tell the heroic version of the story where the federal police work, with work to fight the narcos, and why did you focus on the narco side of things?
Oh, because I didn't want it to be too sad. I don't.
That's a relevant. That's a pretty good answer, actually.
I mean, like, let's be clear, right? Like, the heroic side of this story is no less complex. It's why La Speranzata gets to be a PC, right? Like you can go down there and be hopeful that you're going to end things, but it's so much more complicated. I think the famous quote is something like, "The drug war will end when America decides to stop snorting and sniffing everything." Right? Like,
Yeah.
that's it. That will be what ends it, right? And so, at some level, I kind of want to condemn all of this. I want you to play this game and then step back and think, in what way have I perpetuated this situation? Right, because you own a piece of it. Maybe it's not a big piece, but you do own a piece. I own a piece, and when I think about the stories I want to tell about Mexican American people, about Mexican people, about Mesoamerica, I just finished Seven Seas: The New World, and that's like unabashedly my Wakanda, right? Like colonialism never happened. The Aztec Empire is amazing and beautiful and glorious and heroic, and like your biggest challenge is figuring out how to deal with all these white folks, right? And Cartel is my wire. It's the opposite. It's the hell, right? Like you've got to acknowledge that this is what it's not necessarily really like, but these are the challenges that you face. And so having a colonialized identity, meaning that Mexicans are not the result of just being native people who were just here and white people showed up. We are half native and half white, half Spanish, right? Like that colonialized identity means we have to like find something in between. And from the perspective of a game designer, creating a version of the game in which everybody plays the good guys means that the other guys, the bad guys, are othered, right? They're not you. And what I want to challenge is the whole idea of being you, right? Like you're the bad guy, at least for some definition of bad guy. What choices do you make within that conversation? And PBTA lets me set that up so that I can structure those choices so that you don't just run around shooting guys out of the back of your truck, because that's actually not interesting, right? Like it's all about the secrets you're keeping.
Yeah.
And so,
right.
I mean, that's where the drama actually is, right? That's where the hard choices and hard conversations come from. It's like, what do you care about? Can you survive another day on the streets? Can you make your empires last so that the people that you care about can be taken care of?
exactly. And when I watch Sicario, right, like I look and I'm like, cool, this is a cartel game where the playbooks are El Guero, La Speranzata, and the Sicario.
Yeah.
That's it, man. You're the good guys. For some definition of good
For
guys.
some definition of good.
Well, I think it's also from having played the Ashcan, even the attempts to try to do quote good, like you just get pulled back down like under, like there's like an undercurrent that you like you feel like you can't escape. Like every you start making decisions, you start telling lies, the lies get more complicated, and we'll talk a little bit about this because I know on +1 Forward you actually talked a little bit about this as well. But like some of the moves, like they make it like really hard to you won't easily break out of this in to a heroic side. Like you're gonna swim up through the current to try to reach it.
Yeah, I had like a little tweet storm about heroism and what heroism is within my game. It was obviously prompted by this discussion, but part of it is like the idea that you might just do one heroic thing in your whole life. And that's like maybe how we really are. Like, yeah. I would love to say I'm the kind of person who goes out and just lifts cars off babies and saves people before they're hit by meteors. But like the reality is I'd like to do one great thing in my life that saves somebody else. And Cartel puts you, I sometimes think of Cartel as being like the worst day of your character's life. Like you're a cook for the cartels and 99 times out of 100, everything goes great, but we're going to play that 100th day.
Right.
And on that 100th day, you're going to decide whether the halcón that carries drugs for you to the cartels dies. If he doesn't, you might pay the price. Are you willing to let him live? That's like one of those questions that like I would love to tell you that Mark Diaz-Truman comes to the right answer in my real life when I face that choice. But real heroism is facing the barrel of a gun and saying, I don't care what you do to me, I'm going to do what's right. And if that's, I don't care what you do to me, I'm Superman, you can't hurt me with that gun.
That's not really heroism, right? That's just...
Yeah, you already know the outcome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If anyway, in some terms, it's almost... I don't know if it's the right term or not, but it's almost like a privileged heroism, right? Like, sure. I can't be hurt, so of course I can do this thing.
I mean, the thing...
Yeah.
You brought up the Superman example, right? The thing about Superman is like, is he going to find a way to let the society of people live that is threatening the other society of people? That is a question that gets asked often in Superman stories. And how does
Absolutely.
and how does he do that? It's never about his superpowers. It's all about the choices that he makes.
Right.
Right, and I think Superman is a great example of how to write. Good Superman stories are about what do you do if you're a god.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Like it's why Dr. Manhattan is so amazing in Watchmen.
Yes.
And that's like it's a whole separate conversation,
Yes,
right?
yes,
But for
it is.
me and for the people I know in my life, the people I know in Albuquerque, like I watch Breaking Bad, I know a ton of guys like Jesse, right? Who just never caught a break, who are smarter than a lot of folks I've met outside of Albuquerque, but just never got lucky at the right time in the right place. And because of that, their lives have a certain kind of ring around them. And I want folks who live in places that aren't here and who play games that aren't like that to experience what it means to kind of be boxed in by all the people around you, not because they want to box you in, but because they don't know any other way. And the economic realities are the ones that actually structure who you are and what is possible.
Yeah, that's life, right? That's how that goes.
I love it.
Yeah, so I wrote a role playing game that's a lot like Life. So I hope you guys like playing it. Like it's Life, the role playing game, is a good pitch.
I am definitely down with that.
Well, impoverished life, really difficult life,
Well-
hard life, crime, a life where crime is a real part of your life.
Totally, and part of that is also why it's neon colored, right? Is because in terms of art, like I think Urban Shadows is a kind of impressionistic kind of game. Like we always have this sense that, like, yeah, there are werewolves and there's this secret world behind the world, but Cartel is like the dial got turned exactly the opposite direction.
Yeah.
It's hyper real. My favorite painting at the Chicago Institute of Art is the painting with everybody sitting in the diner. Right,
It's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of the name.
I can't remember either, but I love it too.
Because I'm on a mic. But like, yeah, the whole idea that this is just real, but it's so real, it's hyper real, right? And that hyper reality gives you some sense of what the truth is behind the reality that you're seeing.
I believe that painting is Nighthawks.
That's right, Nighthawks. Yeah, totally. So the Nighthawks painting, right, is so beautiful because fake, but it is at the same time like extraordinarily real. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's what Cartel is. There's no El Narco, there's no Halcón who's just like this person, but somehow, like with The Wire, Omar becomes a kind of symbol for what life must be like at some level. And that's what Cartel is about, is giving you a chance to play through that.
Excellent. I'm going to move us on to our next question before we hit our chat room break, where I think the chat room's been queuing up a few comments and questions. So in PBTA games, principles, agendas, and moves are a large part of helping kind of set the tone of the game, especially for the GM, getting like the game cemented for the GM. Where in your process did you create your principles, agendas, and moves? And what are some of your favorite ones?
Yeah, I mean, those are really interesting because the principles and agendas and moves for us here at Magpie are mostly a thing we do last. Like we do those when it's time to transfer the ability to run the game to someone else, right? So Brennan was running Masks for a really long time with us and with other people before he had a list of explicit agendas, principles, and moves. And that's because the kid, like Brennan, like knows. I'll be like, Young Avengers, like tell me all the Young Avengers, and they'll like go issue by issue and tell me who's in those comics. And I'm like, I saw an MCU movie once. Like, superheroes is not my like number one thing. But for this, right, like I recognized really early that like getting other people to run it is the core of the game, because it doesn't work if the only person who can run it is me. So when we did the Ash Can, I immediately started thinking about how can I convey this knowledge to the other folks who might want to run the game. And Phil sent me a very nice letter and actually like hired somebody to do a piece from your game that sits on my wall. Actually, it's beautiful. And I was like, that actually, you guys probably don't know this, but when I got that letter, I was like, it fucking worked. I was like, I can't believe it worked. you guys, like you just a bunch of people who I don't know that well and who did not come to me to ask me how to run the game, ran the game, and you worked out with like this sort of bloody blood opera ending, right? It's just beautiful. So when it comes to that agenda, I mean, I knew my first agenda from minute one, which was make the drug war feel real. Like it doesn't have to be real. It doesn't have to have the economies behind it, but it needs to feel like there's this constant unending pressure. And I kind of think of that as my wire rule. Like if it doesn't really feel like there's any sense that there's a drug culture, that there's a drug war, that there's product moving, then you're not really playing Cartel. So part of your job as a GM is to always be thinking about what is the business demand, right? What sacrifices must be made to keep money moving, right? And then by the time that filters down to principles, I think that my like Breaking Bad rule is you got to fill the characters' lives with secrets, right? Otherwise, it's the Cartel, the small business game. Like it needs to be like somebody's sleeping with somebody's stealing from El Narco, somebody's conspiring with somebody. That's what makes it an illegal, illicit business. And so built on those two principles, I mean, my favorite move is disrupt someone's routine. Like, fuck something up. There's not enough product. There's people in the wrong place. Something is not right.
Somebody got shut down. Yep.
Once something gets off, there's no ability for the system to kind of absorb those things. It's not really a business, right? It's all secrets and lies and mistrust. And that's how you end up with Sicarios flying off the handle and deciding they're going to murder El Narco for something that happened 10 years ago, right? Because the whole system just cannot hold.
Yeah, well, those three things right there that you described make the drug war feel real. That's like setting. Like now we have a setting for us to play in. Fill the characters' lives with secrets is creating all the tensions between the different characters for the game master or whoever the MC is to push on to then eventually reveal, which is in some essence like one, now you have that you can push on, or the routine of the small business to push on so that you can disrupt someone's routine, which, that could be, I'm going to reveal this secret, which is going to screw everything up.
So Before we jump into the break, just because Mark mentioned it, I'll tell the story for newer listeners. So when we played the Ash Can, we played, I think it was like 3 or 4 sessions.
Play 4 sessions,
right? And our drug cook got, which was played by Jessie. She got killed.
So she got killed because she murdered the person. She almost murdered the person that was trying to kill her.
Yep.
And then she decided to walk out and burn them to death with a Bunsen burner and got shot in the gut in the process.
Yeah. And then she failed the role.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I liked it so much. And then because I'm in the IGDN, I was on the Secret Santa list and I got Mark. And I was like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to do for Christmas. And so I got a black and white ink piece done by Matt Morrow. So I had Matt Morrow do, and so we use Matt for a number of other projects. And so I sent him this email. I'm like, Matt, look, do you have enough time to do a black and white ink piece for me, like before Christmas? And he's like, yeah, sure. He's like, do you have a description of it? And I'm like, hang on. So I send him.
I do.
I send him. First, I send him the whole story. And then I send like a whole separate document detailing exactly the scene I want. And I send it to him and he emails me back and he's like, this is the most detailed art order I have ever gotten in my life.
And perfect, man.
I was like, yes, but this is exactly how I see it in my head. Like it was this like pivotal moment in our game. Yeah. So, and Matt, and true to Matt's word, man, like Matt like killed it on time, delivered it.
He really did.
And I actually keep a copy because I printed one and it's in a frame in my game room as well. Like I have The Death of Soledad, it's called, is hanging on the wall in my game room, which if listeners are watching on the stream, when we are in Studio 1, my basement, you can see it up on the wall in the basement. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of fill that piece in case, because I think a lot of listeners might not have known that story.
It's a great story.
All right, let's take a break for a few minutes, check in with the chat room, and then when we come back, we're going to dig into more of the mechanics from Cartel. But before we do that, let's talk about another show on the network. So, Down with D&D, Chris and the Mad Wizard Sean Merwin dish about everything D&D with a focus on the brand of the newest edition of the world's most popular tabletop RPG. All right, Bob, what's going on in the chat room?
Awesome. Good crowd. Victor Wyatt wanted to know, and I think someone may have already mentioned in the chat room, but Victor wanted to know if there was a plan to have a pronunciation guide in the game for people who are not familiar with the Spanish language, and some of the words are not always easy to figure out when you look at them. You're like,
So, Mark.
I mean, absolutely. My goal, one of the things I love about gamers is that we'll absorb language so fast, right?
Yeah.
Like Like, so my goal is to have every indie gamer cursing in Spanish by like 2020.
Nice.
So
That's
it's like,
legit.
so like, there's going to be a pronunciation key, also with like some warnings about which ones to be more careful about, right? So like,
Sure.
like, the occasional cover on thrown in there is not too bad, but there's some things that we'll put in there that are like, hey, you should be careful with this one. So,
Yeah.
so we will have both the pronunciation guide and a usage guide for the Mexican slang that appears in the book and some other phrases that we just think are fun to throw in the game.
Excellent. We had a guest in the room briefly who had to leave, unfortunately. Hijos del Rol.
Yeah, Hijos. Shout out to Hijos. They're this is awesome. They're doing a lot of great work on the Spanish-speaking indie community.
Cool. They wanted to know why you decided to use keys in the style of Lady Blackbird or Solar System for gaining experience.
Oh my God, the experience track. If you've talked to me about Cartel in the last 4 years, you know that I have struggled with trying to find some way to award XP in the game. The original draft of Cartel, before it was Nashcan, had XP actually awarded based on money, like D&D. Like, if you got money, so like the whole idea was you would get money and then you get XP because of it. That didn't work, it turns out. Nobody cared about money. They were all too busy with their like telenovela stuff. So that went out the window. I did stat highlights for a while. I found that super boring. I tried XP on a Mist, which is like a Dungeon World thing and Masks thing, but that really rewards characters like learning and growing over time. And most Cartel characters don't learn or grow. They struggle against they die. They struggle against the challenges. So as we were kind of talking about it, keys had come up before because there's a secondary set of problems where sometimes characters do not engage the fiction because they view it, maybe rightly so, as kind of suicidal. Right. So if you're like, hey, I'm the Sicario, and somebody's like, you should go do this thing for us. And the Sicario's like, no, that sounds dumb. I'm not doing it. So it kind of killed two birds with one stone. Right. Like we gave characters a whole way to engage the fiction according to what their playbook was up to, but not limit them to just those things. Right. So a good example is as the Sicario, you could choose mercy as one of your keys. You can be the Sicario who's kind of soured on violence or not. Like cool. you can not take that if that's not your jam. And it kind of beautifully, like all at once, kind of solved a bunch of problems. It also means that you can advance much faster. And given that the average session of Cartel is probably 1 to 2 sessions, advancing a couple of times from keys is really cool.
Awesome. All right, one more, and then we can move on to the next segment. The awesome Genesis of Legend, Jason.
Hey, what's up, Jason?
He said, how does Cartel address some of the challenges of the source material, such as the sexism or abuse within a criminal drug enterprise context, while maintaining a welcoming environment for players?
Yeah, it's a lot easier with a pillion, huh? Like, baby dragons don't have this problem. It's funny you're in here because one of the things I love about Magpie is we have very different, like core interests, right? So crime fiction has always been like my core interest, and sometimes it gets dark. I am a big fan of safety tools. I think that playing Cartel without safety tools is not cool. Like you got to figure out for your group what safety tools make sense, and you've got to use them liberally, right? So it's your job as a GM when you run this game to make sure people understand both the adult content but also how to shape it, because there's going to be stuff that comes up in the game that you've got to figure out how to work around. I'm not a huge fan of sexual violence in the game. Like, I don't think it serves much of a purpose within this kind of fiction, and I will X-card it almost all the time, right? Like, I just don't think it's a great fit. I actually don't feel that strongly about that with Urban Shadows, where, like, there's a much broader spectrum of what, quote, sexual violence might mean. But I've also learned that groups have radically different tolerances from group to group. I've played with some groups where I'm, like, X-carding things left and right because they're so intense, and I've played with groups who are X-carding what I'm doing left and right, and both are cool. So my job when we do the book is to make sure that those safety tools are kind of central, and I think Bluebeard's Bride provides a great example of this. Right? It's not tucked away in the back of the book. It's like page 7, right? And those safety tools and others like them are really crucial to good play, I think, within this context. There's another set of things around how the game is structured, meaning that it is totally the GM's responsibility to ensure that consequences fall, meaning that whatever behavior the players engage in, like, hey, murder all these witnesses, that's going to have consequences. And it's the GM's job to make sure that those consequences are morally interesting. right? Meaning that it's one thing if you're just like murder all these witnesses and then you dispose of the bodies and nobody ever talks about this again. And it's another thing to realize that the guy you killed is the brother of the woman you were already dating, right?
Nice.
Yep.
There is the greatest hard move in the history of hard moves, aside from Spider-Man finding out that Vulture is his prom date's dad.
Yeah, prom date's dad.
God, like,
What a great
maybe number one, right? Yeah, great hard move. The number one for me is still the moment when Jesse finds out that the kid that killed Combo is his girlfriend's brother. Like, ba-bam! Like, everything about that instance comes crashing back down on Jesse, and he never even pulled the trigger. Right?
Mm.
And that part of Breaking Bad sets off a whole set of consequences for all the characters that result from one person revealing nothing more than a connection that seems innocuous. So when it comes to the adult content of the game, I think it's the GM's job to challenge those sexism, abuse, racism, whatever's there. It needs to be challenged in the sense that it cannot be portrayed as cost-free. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Right. It's all about the consequences. It's all about acknowledging that when you ship a bunch of migrants north and they all die because you weren't paying enough attention to them, that they have families that are going to come looking for you down the
Oh
road.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I mean, I think that's something that if we contrast that to heroic style games, like there often isn't consequences. Like you go,
Right.
like you take your adventuring party into a dungeon and murder a bunch of stuff. There's not always consequences of orc retaliation later or something. I mean, sometimes people do that specifically, but
Maybe not in your games.
Yeah.
Chris is over here like, what are you talking about,
I mean,
Phil?
maybe your underachiever players aren't killing everything like I do. But
Yeah, but maybe my underachiever. I quote this.
Yeah.
Like maybe my bad guys are smart enough to run away sometimes, and maybe they have friends and family outside of those spaces.
No, but
and
I'm 100% on board. Like, I'm totally with that. Like, that's totally how I run games.
I don't like to leave loose ends. That's all
Yeah,
I'm
places.
saying.
Sometimes sometimes you don't realize the loose ends you're leaving. That's the point.
But I also think there's a betrayal that Phil's kind of hinting at, right? Like, say you're playing Mask and you save somebody's life, right? And then that person immediately is put on trial for being a serial killer, right? Like, I can pull that move once on a miss. Like, that's like kind of a cute inversion of like, what does it mean to save somebody's life, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
But if I'm constantly undermining your heroism by revealing that the people you save are actually monsters, right? Like, I've done a disservice to the core premise of the game.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just there's a bunch of other ways to do that though, right? Like you don't have to just reveal somebody as being evil or whatever. You can bring people in from off screen. You can bring people in that haven't existed yet to complicate the situations that you thought you had nicely neatly wrapped up.
Right. What I like about that though, in for like say for instance for Cartel, is that you're gonna get your hands dirty, but but the worst part of it is that even after you get your hands dirty, like that's not the worst part of it. Like
Right.
like you killed that guy and like you killed that guy and poured acid on him and poured him down the drain, but somebody's like there's a consequence coming for you. Yeah.
I mean, that's
there's a great example with that. Like the cook has a move to get rid of a body, right? And because anybody can get rid of a body, the move has to do more. It has to be a different kind of guarantee to the player, right? And so the miss on that is not that somebody finds the body. That would just violate the whole move. It's that the person who did it, the cook, can't forget it, right? They're stuck. They cannot clear stress until they atone.
Oh,
There
God,
you go.
that's
So you're-
so good.
Right. So you're like, great, I get rid of this body. It's like a miss. Oh, you totally works. You just see that guy every time you sleep. Right. And then it's up to you and the player, the GM and the player to figure out what does atoning mean?
Yeah.
That's a story beat that you have in play then, right? That you have to get to because the mechanics demand it.
Well, and the fact that you can't clear your stress track is just I mean, because
It's rough.
Then you will atone for it. Like it's not it's not optional. Like you will atone for this. The
You will
clock
atone
is-
or die,
Right,
right?
the
Atone
clock
or
is
die.
ticking.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right. I want to throw one more in here just
Sure.
because this is from Magpie Mirror Test. Actually, I have a question. How does Cartel evoke the sense of place/setting? How does it make games feel like it's about the Mexican drug war rather than, say, drug crime in Baltimore?
Oh man, you guys ask the good questions. This is awesome. Okay, so this is a thing I wrestled with a lot because when I was done with Cartel, I looked at all the parts and I said, wait a second, there's actually not a lot of Mexican culture in the core moves. And there's like a little bit in the stress moves. One is that you can go see a priest, which has a particular implication within, very Catholic Mexico. That's when I realized all the culture lives in the playbooks. So each playbook brings with them that slice of drug culture, right? And that's where what makes it the Mexican drug war. So, for example, if I was to do Baltimore in the 90s, because I'm currently rewatching The Wire, like I do all the time, you wouldn't have sicarios, you'd have soldiers. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't have halcones, you'd have corner boys. And you wouldn't have narcos, you'd have whatever the hell Avon is, right? And each of those would have different sort of conditions for how they work, different enlaces, different whatever. And if you want more hints about what we might do in the future with Cartel, we have a couple of hacks kind of lined up that will explore what the core mechanics of Cartel look like in other situations with different playbooks and different sort of rules. One of them that is my favorite is actually a one-on-one game where the GM and the player are the only two players, and it's a little bit of a noir detective game where the player has to try to solve crimes and get the truth out of people without things falling apart.
We're playing that game.
Yeah, we are. So just wait. So I can't reveal too much because I don't want to say too much. But that's the whole idea. All of the culture lives in the playbooks. So what I'm excited about with Cartel is watching other people mess with some of the moves. And we don't release a lot of our stuff Creative Commons that's sort of sensitive. So Urban Shadows is not Creative Commons because I don't really want to ever have a conversation with somebody around why their racially offensive playbook is offensive, right? Like we're happy to see people take things from that and use mechanics because mechanics aren't copyrightable, but the system is ours, right? But I'm really excited to see people use the technologies that are in Cartel in other ways, right? And one of them is I'd love to see what kind of other cultures can be brought to bear around some of these moves. And so, yeah, that's a thing, right? We'll see what kind of other development Cartel has down the road.
Oh, so because now now that you're saying that there's this possibility for hackable, like I'm now imagining The Godfather, and now I'm imagining Goodfellas, and that the 50s, 60s, the Vegas mobsters and.
Right. But the challenge of that is that you have to go beyond the stereotypes, right? And so a lot of our work as we expand this is to think about what's the technology in Cartel that already works and how do we expand to those other spaces. Right. So my goal is to really challenge some of those spaces, but also in the new book we just funded, like the new supplement Sin Fronteras, which means without borders. Like we're going to talk about how to push you into those spaces so that you can run a game of Cartel set in the 60s in Vegas. That would be fucking awesome.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah, I have a partial love for it because I have some tangential family members that had.
I am stunned.
Right. We are so far away from anything that is of actual like my central interests. Like,
yeah, it's really funny because these games are like struggles for Chris because I grew up outside of New York City, and I go a couple generations back, and my great grandfather was a bootlegger and all that stuff, and so my Italian uncles, like there's a culture of like hanging around with my Italian uncles and what it was like.
Perfect.
Yeah, and so for me, for me to slide into crime fiction, like to run it, I'm like, yep, I totally know what I'm doing here. Like I'm good in Blades and. Cartel was one. And for me, actually, one of the things that you did to help answer that question, one of the things that you did for in the Ash Cannon, it's in the quick start right now, is that you put these 3 stories that kind of encapsulate the Mexican drug war. Yeah. And they really give you this sense of. They give you a sense of, I know the major tropes for telling crime stories, but then it adds this layer in of like, oh, okay, I get it. Like that whole thing about like if you get picked up carrying money across the border, you ask for a receipt.
Yeah,
because
it's amazing, right? Like,
it's not that you lost $50,000. because the cartel will absorb $50,000. It's that no one thinks you took it.
Yep, exactly. And I think the challenge of this, right, is the diversity of it, right? Which is like when I introduce new players to role playing, I start with usually like mouse guard, right? Like you're adorable mice with swords who are protecting their people. Let's do it, right? And what I want to do is create space for this completely other kind of story, right? Which is not everybody's cup of tea, right? Like I totally get it, and I think it's been really cool to see Blades make some room for these kind of stories because I think that Blades is accessible because it's like Ghost Punk and Duskwall and all this stuff, and yeah, like I'm excited to create that space. But I'll tell you that my next game is probably not going to be about like super adult stuff. Like,
Cartel's an important design because it shows how thematically and how culturally you can go with a game. Like you are using the playbooks to provide a cultural foundation for play. Like that is kind of the design of these. That's what it sounds like. Anyway.
And to tell hard stories.
Well, I mean that too, but like there are other games that tell hard stories.
Yeah, I'm saying this one marries both, right? This marries the culture with
sure.
With
My point is that telling hard stories is not new. Telling culturally relevant stories is way more rare. Especially in this, especially with this, even in the indie games spotlight, like with this high of a profile, because Magpie is doing it, so it's important. Like I think it's important. That's my opinion anyway.
Thank you, man. That's very kind.
All right, we should jump back into
the. By the way, there's going to be no social media depository.
Yeah, because we're just going
to. We have 2 more questions for Mark. Then we'll have to get out of here because by then it'll be like we've gone. We're going long. All right. Well, so Mark, we established that the characters of this game, they are not heroic. How do the playbooks and specific moves from the playbooks reinforce the non-heroic qualities of the characters?
Yeah, we're talking about this issue of culture, right? So there's 7 playbooks that are kind of at the heart of the game, which are El Narco, the boss, Cocinero, the cook, Halcon, the kind of corner boy, errand boy, Esposa, who's married to one of the other characters, the Polizetta, who's a dirty cop, the Sicaria, who's a recently returned hit woman, and then Larata, who's the informant. And then there's 4 LE playbooks, the Guero, Esperanzada, Tahur, Mariachi, right? So like some of these playbooks are kind of heroic, like Larata and La Esperanzada actually have a lot of like really positive things. Like they want to bring the cartel down, they want to do justice, whatever that means. But the rest of them are like a wide spectrum of characters. So what's interesting about that is I think there's kind of a fruitful void, if you'll allow me some super nerdy game design terms.
You should actually use as many super nerdy game design terms as possible.
Yeah, awesome.
We've invented a bunch of them ourselves. So
that's great. Okay. So there's a fruitful void when someone looks down at their character and then has to find some way to connect themselves to the person they're about to play. So the reason I'm not a huge fan of villain games, which might surprise people that I've read Cartel, is because I think they mostly act as an alibi. So somebody's like, I'm going to play Suicide Squad. I've always wanted to just run around murdering NPCs because I think that's fun. So I'll play Croc and I'll just murder anybody who comes near me. Right.
Sure.
And like, that's okay. Like if that's your thing, that's cool. It's not my thing. I don't think that's very interesting. I actually think the opposite happens when people play Cartel, is that they're forced to kind of contend with not having an alibi. Like, sure, you can be El Narco and you can say, I'm just a terrible person. I'm going to play that terrible person. But that's like a mask that you wear that's not going to last very long. You have to make decisions about what that character does. So they have to have some reason for why they ended up in this situation.
Yes.
Right.
Can I just like comment on this whole idea of villain games? Yeah. So like I don't think villainous games, like truly, like when people talk about villainous games, we get into that crazy thing that people talk about with D&D where it's like, oh, we're just gonna murder each other, right? Like I don't really think that is a non-heroic villainous game like you were saying. Like I think it's about motivation and agenda and being stuck in a bad situation to begin with and not really having anywhere to go because your options are that limited. Like
exactly.
That's really the kind of play that we're talking about here. Like, well, I have like 3 choices and they're all not very good. So what am I going to do? Like what actually matters to me as a character? And that is the kind of play that I think that this game is providing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, totally. And with that is this beautiful moment where I watch a white person, usually, because a lot of the people who play in our community are white, suddenly have this extraordinary empathy for the Mexican situation, right? They're like, oh, I'm a cook. I guess I went to school in the States and I couldn't keep my visa, and so I came home and this is the best I could do.
Yeah.
And they're like, holy shit. Like, that there's got to be somebody that's true for,
Yeah.
right?
Because now we're talking about tragic characters, right?
That's a hell of a moment.
That's a hell of a moment, right? Or somebody who's like, I'm El Narco and I run this place. Jesus Christ, I run this place. What's wrong with me, right? And it actually simulates this moment that I had running a Monster Hearts game where basically the Infernal was like, okay, I got to beat this girl up. And he was like, wait a second, do I hit girls? Am I the kind of character who hits girls? Yeah, I guess I am. Give me the dice.
No,
like,
man.
Right? And like he had this whole thing going on with his own like masculinity and what it meant to him to hit women. And I was like, do I need to X card this? But everybody was cool. Okay, let's go forward. And that character ended up playing out this amazing arc around his own violence. And I don't know what that person was working through in his own stuff. And he didn't put it on us, right? Like he was just playing.
Mm-hmm.
But like when I watch people confront Cartel, they're left with having to come up with some way to square the circle of being a human, right?
Yeah.
And humans aren't just evil, even the worst of them, right? And so each part of the game is about trying to figure out what part of the drug trade are you bringing to the table, what motivates you to be in this space, and then how can I, as the GM, challenge those motivations? So, for example, during one of the very first play tests we ever had was Jim Crocker, who's a great retailer out in the Northeast, was playing El Narco, and I said, so why do you run the plaza? And he's like, well, look, here's the deal. I own a whole bunch of stores in the area, which are all like Radio Shack kind of stores. And when the last Narco died, the cartel came to me and said, you're going to run this place now. We're going to run everything through your stores. And you can do it or we'll kill you and we'll do it.
Well, then that's an interesting story then, right? Like you're El Narco, but you were not there because you want to be. You were there because it was either that or die.
Yep. And I've also had players be like, yeah, I'm El Narco because I grew up in this thing. My dad was the last narco. This is all I've ever known.
So this is your cultural heritage.
This is your birthright, dude.
Yeah.
You're king, right? And it's hard for to quote Tashaka, right? It's hard for a good man to be king.
That's right.
So here we go, right? And I think both of those extremes are fucking awesome. And as a GM, I'm happy to run either one, right? Like I'm happy to. There's no point at which I say that's not a good enough reason to be El Narco.
Now I'm gonna ask you I'm going to ask you a follow-up question now. Like, we've just talked about how, like, you ask these questions in play. Like, this stuff has got to be in the book then, right? Like, in the GM advice section. Like, you need to ask these questions of your characters before play starts in session 0. It's got to be there, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so Brendan had the whole, like, when our team came together thing in Masks, and it kind of blew my mind because I was like, oh, yeah, we could just tell people. Here are the questions you should ask.
There you go. Okay.
So each playbook is going to have moves associated with them, like in Masks, and also starting questions. Like these are the things you should probably pull out of the characters, right? That are specific to this particular playbook.
That's perfect. That's
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Oh, where are we going next?
Yeah. So one of the concerns, and I'm going to use the word villainous, but even though we know the space we're talking about is non-heroic, but one of those concerns when people are talking about villainous games is player versus player and player elimination, i.e., via character death. So how does Cartel kind of deal with both of those things, right? Because you are taking a group of people who are basically second world, so they're not bound by normal laws, and then we know from the moves we're gonna load them up with a whole bunch of secrets. Right? Like you're just pouring pouring lighter fluid on the whole thing.
That's the point.
Right? And then somebody's gonna drop a match. Yeah. So how does the can you talk a little bit about like how that gets handled in the game? Sure.
So the first thing is that what I love about I worked on Urban Shadows for a long time. It was a lengthy process. It's a big game. And there are days where I would sit down to playtest and be like, okay, here we go with 4 hours of character creation, because you can totally trip down a rabbit hole and spend the whole time working on the city, right? And so what I wanted from Cartel explicitly was like, I want people to be like yelling at each other within 45 minutes of sitting down to play this game, right? So it was like explicitly, I want this to go right the fuck now. And so what's interesting about the game is that there's this constant push and pull between that instinct and the instinct you're describing, which is everybody should still get to play, right? So the first thing that we do is there's a lot of ties between the characters that kind of set them up to have these conflicted relationships. So a good example is that the cook will say that they need somebody for right now, but the relationship's not going to last. So they'll say something like, yeah, El Narco hired me to do this, but I know that as soon as I teach everybody how to cook, they're going to kill me, right? I'm like, great, cool. So we've got this now very conflicted relationship. Both El Narco and El Cocinero know they're not going to be able to maintain this relationship, but it hasn't broken down yet. And then over the course of play, it usually breaks down. Like it's going to break down pretty fast. But my experience is that role-playing games don't move that fast. Like there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of misses that lead to interesting spaces. And so it's my job as the GM to keep the pot at the right boil. And a lot of the GM tools, the moves, the things on the playbook are all designed to do that, to keep it at the right temperature. So when it does boil over, we have this move that Jason Morningstar actually came up with after playing a very early draft of Cartel. It's basically Jason's move. I'm going to credit him in the book. Like it's totally on exactly almost as he sent it to me, called When You Get Fucking Shot, right? So that's our harm mechanic. You don't have, you're good.
It's like one of the best harm mechanics I've ever seen in games that are powered by the apocalypse because of how it's described. It's when you get fucking shot. Not when you get shot, when you get fucking shot. It's just that.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, Jason nailed the idea that what actually matters in crime fiction is not when you get beat up or knifed or shot at. It's when somebody like shoots a bullet in your chest, right? And you look down and you're like, what is this about, right? And for this when you get fucking shot move, the options are on a 10+, you're pretty much cool. Like you're like things work out. Like you got shot, but it wasn't as bad as it looked. And then on a 7 and 9, you have to pick some really nasty options. Like you're gonna take a -1 ongoing, you need immediate medical attention, whatever it is. And then on a miss, you die. That's it.
Right.
Yes, and that's what happened in our game.
Yeah, I think. I mean, the only thing we did was I prolonged it
We
to make it
prolonged
more
it.
dramatic, like,
Yes.
so somebody else could show up on the scene.
I just want to warn Mark and everybody else out there that's listening. Like my phone, we weren't going to use it originally.
Uh-oh.
It is getting close to being dead. So, and I can't charge it at the same time as we're talking. 'cause
Oh,
it's
no.
an iPhone.
No.
So we can still go, but at some point in the near future, it's going to die.
What's it down to?
Yeah.
5%.
Oh boy, we should
All
get
right,
through
we'll-
these
we'll keep-
questions.
We'll get through quick. So there's two things here, right? One is the GM should be careful about the shooting, right? And we talk about that in the quick start, but I'll talk more about it in the book, which is getting a gun out in Cartel is a really hard move. You're literally putting death on the table.
Yeah.
Right. And so as a GM, it's really about kind of backing off and thinking through the role of violence. I think that actually you have to be a lot more thoughtful about the role of violence in Cartel than you do in other games because it can fucking kill PCs.
Oh,
right?
this reminds me of John Wick's Blood and Honor. With
Yes.
Yep.
like
Yes.
you draw that katana, somebody's
fucking
dying.
Yeah.
Somebody dies, yeah. And when I played it with Jason, we had an awesome game. Like at the end of the game, he like killed this informant who was trying to rat out El Narco, and like it surprised me that he killed him at that particular moment. It's beautiful. And when he was talking about the game afterwards, he talked about like that it sounds like it should be like really macabre and difficult and dark, but actually the game is almost like weirdly darkly humorous because you don't know what else to do but laugh, right, at the tragedy of it all. And so there has to be character death on the table, but with that also needs to come some sense that there's always a new role for the PC to fill if they die, right? So if you die, well, you just make a new character, and making a new character doesn't take an hour. It takes maybe 15 minutes. And somebody's always coming up, right? Marlowe's always coming up to replace Avon, right? There's always a new Omar, right? And that sense of the crime world always has space for you is also a part of the game. That there's no point at which somebody dies and we think, well, there's just no way to add another PC. Like there's always a way to add another PC. Pick a new playbook, my friend, because the CIA just got to town, right? Like whatever that is an opportunity to see the game grow and change. And I'm really looking forward to the point at which somebody runs a game for so long that none of the original PCs are in the story.
Challenge
Right.
accepted.
Phil will do
Awesome,
it.
yeah.
I'm
That's
in.
great.
I might not play, but Phil will do it.
Just by the way, as our backup plan, if we lose Mark on the phone,
We'll call him on Phil's phone, and we could do that, or on somebody's phone.
phone. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll bring you back.
Yeah.
because we're not quite done yet.
Yeah. Are we going to the last question?
Yeah, last question.
All right. So moving away from the mechanics and towards publishing, what have you done with the art design of the books to help enforce this theme of narco fiction in Mexico?
I mean, so like I said, I'm like super lucky to have Marissa here at the. Well, I'm super lucky that Marissa in my life period, but like especially as art director, because she will make these like miracles happen. She's like, yeah, we're gonna do like neon colors and all this stuff. And she grew up here in New Mexico too, so she has some sense of the color palette of sort of Mexican art and culture. But when she and Miguel kind of teamed up with Andrew to put together this whole look for the game, what it did was it captured for me like sort of the beautiful violence of the whole thing. And I don't use that phrase lightly. Like, I think the violence of the cartels is like one of the greatest tragedies of the modern era. 100,000 people have died, and we as Americans especially don't seem to care that much. But with that is kind of a macabre fascination with death. It's a thing about Mexican culture, right? Is this sense of like having to live through revolutions, right? Part of my research goes all the way back to the 1910s, where you think about how did Mexico get to this place? And a big part of it has to do with the role that the U.S. has and continues to play in Mexican policy. And so my goal is to get across this sort of beautiful violence through the book. And the cover, the blood splatters in neon paint that Miguel has cooked up for us, like it really gets across this sense of gravitas, but also that the game is going to be a fun ride. And it gets at that thing I talked about earlier, the hyper reality of the whole thing, that it's not true. It's not exactly how the drug trade works, but it is instead a version of the drug trade that gets across the truths of it, the terrible, beautiful truth of it. And then, of course, we're matching it to this new format we're trying, which is the 8x8 sort of adult game that we've done with Bluebeard's Bride. And our hope is that gives us, I don't know, some different space to play in than the typical 6x9 Urban Shadows, throw it in your backpack, it's totally ready to trek across the country and run 7 games. And instead puts it into a place where there's some consideration of it as an art object, and that we have a responsibility to make games that are beautiful as books, in addition to being beautiful as games.
I mean, it's gonna be sticking out of my bookcase because it'll be.
Really, I think you should just use that one as your coffee table book.
No, I have kids, man. I'm not putting something that nice down on the same table my kids. No, it goes up on a shelf and comes down on game night. Like. No,
yeah, exactly.
I feel like you're just wasting the book then if it's that gorgeous, especially the candy skull cover.
Look, I'm with you.
The sugar skull cover, I should say. Sorry.
I will redo my shelf so that it can point outward. It can just
be
up on the shelf.
That's legit.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, the candy skull just pointing. It's just
sugar skull. I screwed that
like
up.
Like those plate holders that you have for displaying collectible plates.
Yeah,
standing up.
Exactly.
I'm down with that. I'll do that.
You need the glass case with a series of game books. They're just gorgeous art books.
No, I'm just keeping their grubby hands. Like I have the collector's Blades book. Like, no, my kids don't get anywhere near the collector's Blades book.
Oh, I love my collector's Blades book. Like it has the like little runes on the side and stuff. I love it. Right?
As an aside, my father, who's a blacksmith, I'm like trying to talk him into making me the blades. Like,
nice, from Blades in the Dark. Oh man,
that's my next goal.
Real quick, is there any other follow-up questions that either of you want to put out there for art?
Chat room has some questions.
Real quick, no art questions.
I mean, I'm in love with the art. Like I'm just like I was blown away by it because, like I said, I went from the ash can, and then when I downloaded the quick start, I was like, "You're killing me." I think I even tweeted it.
Hyper reality is not the incorrect word for this at all. It very much is that neon. It's very cool. Like I like that style quite a bit.
I was actually really pleased with when I saw the whole thing laid out.
So what do we got in the chat room before we move on to the after show?
This is another question from Magpie Mirror Test. Cartel is really important for telling a non-white setting and making it a central focus. However, the tabletop RPG culture still leans pretty white. Is there a way to better integrate these kinds of stories, i.e. non-white stories, into mainstream RPG culture so that it becomes part of the stew rather than showcased in a few specific games? That's a really great question.
Mark, I'll just let you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have this conversation all the time. Like, I'm not dumb. Like, I'm aware that, a game about the Mexican drug war is not exactly masks in terms of its broad mainstream appeal, right? But I also think it's really important to shift what broad mainstream means, right? So I think back to Julia Ellingbo's Steal Away Jordan, and that it was a game that at the time was sort of mocked in some cases for being poorly put together or like, dismissed as being racist by some people. And it's a game about playing slave narratives, which is like one of the greatest hero stories in the American canon. Is like you're fighting against slave owners, guys. The only people worse are Nazis, and it's a tie, right? Like
that's accurate.
That's a game. That game opened a lot of doors for people like me. So part of why Cartel is Cartel and not just some futuristic neo-noir game is because I want people to confront the reality of now, right? The reality of 2007, not 2700 or right like 1970. I want them to confront now. And I can't do that if all I'm ever doing is metaphor. So like I am 100% all on board with Wild being the metaphorical immigrants of Urban Shadows. But there has to be some point at which I'm not just always the metaphor. It's actually about me and my people and my culture. That said, I am excited to see every game we release be technology that people can use in their own games. And I think that, if Cartel inspires a set of games that use its technology, like for example, I love the Get the Truth Out of Somebody move. It has this beautiful effective play where it structures the conversation without limiting it. I'm excited to see people use that move other places. So it's kind of like my job to crack the door open, and I'm excited to see where other people go to push it further.
Yeah, those are the kind of mechanics, like technology that you said that I like to see in play. Like these more structures for conversations that are open ended. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of like I've been looking for an investigative move for PBTA, and the one in City of Mist is one I like a lot. Like it's like you get to know somebody or a situation, then you can ask questions equal to power. So like you can ask a number of questions. It doesn't limit you, other than the situation that you're in, to what kinds of questions that you can ask. And I think that is a great place to go as far as that kind of move. So I mean, we talked about that last week. That whole what you just talked about, that move is wonderful for stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and like I think that's true about a lot of our things. Like I've seen folks working on like a Harry Potter kind of magic school hack using Brendan's shifting stats from masks, right? Like,
oh, neat.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's really cool, right? And so I kind of think of it as my job to kind of kick the door down a little bit here and challenge people on, what is normal, what is the norm for you and your group. If you say, well, we just don't play these kind of games, like that's cool, I understand. But I also can't help but think of the Junot Diaz quote, which is motherfuckers will read a book that's 1/3 Elvish, but put 2 sentences of Spanish and they think white people think we're taking over. Right? Which is like, yeah, I know that Mexican drug lords may not be the first thing that came to mind for a role-playing game, but it's not that much crazier than queer monsters in a suburban high school. Right. So give it a shot, right? And see what happens.
So here, like, can I throw one more thing? So like this whole idea of like culture and games and whatnot, like, okay, I'm a giant jazz fan. Like I played a ton of jazz. I love jazz culture. I love everything about the 30s and the 40s and into the 50s about jazz. Like there's a game that's been stewing around the back of my head that I've never actually talked about in front of anybody because I'm like, I can't write this game because I'm a white dude, right? Like what was it like for those jazz musicians that in the 30s and the 40s decided to hop in cars and go south and play all the clubs down south? Like that's a cool, those are cool stories, right? Like there are a bunch of them out there. And like the only place in mainstream media that I've ever seen is if anybody's ever seen Bird, the movie Bird, like they have that whole sequence with that and like the problems with heroin in that culture and whatnot. And it's like, those are fascinating stories, and how to gamify that is something that I would like to do someday. But like I actually kind of have the wrong skin color for that.
So,
unfortunately.
Well, I think you got to find partners for it, right?
Correct.
Which is,
Yeah.
And I don't like the idea that like white people should only stick to writing games about white people, because that's not. I don't think that's healthy for any of us. I would encourage you to do that game in the same way that Jason Morningstar did Night Witches, right? Which is like
find people to do it with,
talk to the people, but take it a step further than Jason did and find actual collaborators. I cannot emphasize enough how big a difference Miguel Angel Espinosa has made to this game. The original draft of Cartel had the police completely wrong. And Mike was like, yeah, this is not how police work in Mexico.
Nice.
And so the quick start is 100% different. And that's me like one step removed, right? Like imagine being 10 steps removed. You're like, I don't even know somebody in this culture. Cool. Yeah. That's an excuse to get to know people in that culture and invite them to collaborate with you. And nothing makes me sadder than hearing white people say, well, I don't really want to play this game, or it's not really my game to write or whatever. It's like, dude, throw your resources in there. Just invite other people along for the party.
I mean, I think that makes great sense. I wanted to jump back for a second to that question about, putting themes into,
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
to other games. And in listening to Mark's answer, I realized like part of the reason there needs to be a Cartel is for the exact reason that I didn't catch that the Wild is talking about immigrants in Urban Shadows, right? Because I'm so far removed from that like context that I didn't get the transfer of those themes into that game, but I do get it when I play something like Cartel, where it's far more, where it's not blended into some other type of fiction. You know what I'm saying? Like,
sure.
like having both of those, like having Cartel actually lets me now see, those similar themes in other places.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's always been a challenge for Magpie, is that we understand that not everything we do is gonna, like, we're stunned by the success of Bluebeard's Bride, right? Like, we're like, hey, let's make this game that's about like, women exploring their terribly abusive husband's house, and we're like, we'll sell a couple of copies. And it was such a hit that it really challenged us to be like, oh wow, can we do Cartel in a really serious way, not just have it be a project Mark works on in his spare time. And that's the thing where we have to balance. We're going to find you're going to see projects come out of Magpie that are very mainstream, for better or worse, and you're going to see some projects that are very, very on the edge. And our goal is to balance the entirety of that project for us across all the things we do. But always, our hope is that no matter what you play from us, it's always challenging you to think differently about games and differently about the subjects that those games are about.
Which I absolutely love. I love the balance in the company, and I like the stuff that you make. Like, the games are always really good. They're always produced really well. So, thanks.
Thank you, man. Thank you. And you guys are super fun to talk to. Like, I think it's pretty cool.
You.
It's pretty cool to have a high level design conversation on a podcast. It's awesome. Man.
Oh,
Really
we've done 200 so episodes of high level design.
That's what this show is all about.
Yeah. No, it's been great.
Are we good?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you that I'm gonna preview for people who are not patrons. The question I'm going to ask Mark when we get to the after show is about ash cans.
Yeah, I'm also going to talk about Improv the Perverse, a Jacksonian Gothic American horror RPG by Nathan Paletta in the after show, because I got to play it this past weekend. What a great
Super
game.
cool Kickstarter.
Oh,
this
man.
is a great Kickstarter.
The game is amazing. I love everything about it. It's very much a me game.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
All right, you want to do our wrap up, and we'll
let's do that. Well, thank you everyone so much for listening.
If you are free on Tuesday evenings, 8:45 p.m. Eastern, 6:45 p.m. the Queen's time, come join us live on Twitch, where you can chat with other listeners in the ever awesome chat room for life and ask us the occasional question.
If you cannot make it to the live show, check out our podcast each week wherever you get your podcasts, and take a listen to some of the other shows in the Misdirected Mark Network, such as Down with D&D, Advantaged Insight, Bonestone and Obsidian, Panda's Talking Game, Cypher Speak with Darcy and Troy, the Gnome Cast, the Wednesday Evening Podcast All-Stars, Zhang Yu Hustle, Hobbs and Friends of the OSR, and our newest member, She's a Super Geek. You can and should also check out some of our brother podcasts, The Knights of the Night and the always amazing Gaming MBS.
Then leave us some feedback. You can always reach us at the antiquated email systems via MMP. God, I miss the old ones.
Sorry, man.
Right. MMP at misdirectedmark.com. Check out our Facebook group. Hit us up on Twitter. The show is at Misdirected Mark.
That's correct.
I'm at DNA Phil.
Yep.
He's at Robert M. Everson.
Yep.
As always, the Light 101.
You can Twitter at me there if you want, but really just Twitter at me at Misdirected Mark. That's pretty much where I do all my business on Twitter.
Of course. And Mark, where do people find you on the internet?
You can tweet at me at Trumonz, TRUMONZ, on Twitter, or you can hit me up via the Magpie Games website at magpiegames.com. And of course, right now, you can go on Kickstarter and look for Cartel. We'll probably have a link in the notes for you all.
Yes.
I mean, you can find our books like in any fine gaming establishment that sells fine indie games.
And then finally, you can always reach us in the G Plus community.
Yes.
Because I just, injected that thing right in the middle of the end.
Of course.
Well, you can go to the oh man, what was the plaza
of our social media empire.
Yep,
Yes.
the G Plus community. Thank you.
There you go. If you like what we do here and on the other shows in the Misdirected Mark Network, you can support our Patreon campaign, and please do at patreon.com/MMP. Patrons get access to the after show, pre-production show notes, musical parodies, Panda's Talking Games, bonus outtakes, and other special releases.
And with that, this has been a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs, a mic drop.
We out!
Do 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 do.
Welcome to The after show.
The after show.
The after show.
Yeah, Mark, we didn't prepare you for
Yeah,
that
we didn't
part.
prepare you for that at all.
Yeah, sorry.
We do
I
it
didn't
every
know
week.
there was like a 3-part harmony, man.
It's
Oh,
a
yeah.
shtick.
Jeez.
Yeah, there's a whole thing for the after show.
All right, before we get really into this, maybe
Yeah.
we should flip over to somebody else's device.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Yeah, just to make sure
what's
you
your
wanna go
phone
back to the-
limping along
It's
at?
got like 2% power.
Oh boy,
Yeah.
I can't. I'm happy we didn't drop Mark in the middle of the.
Me too. But it's gonna die really, really soon.
I don't know who's got a better device that we could plug in.
I mean, I just gotta plug it into this. I don't really care whose phone it is or whatever. This is actually really good. Like
Yeah,
I always do
That's
this on my phone
actually
from now on.
really good.
Mark, thank you for bearing with us. I don't know why the internet was going so poorly with my iPad, but you know.
No, it worked great, man. This has been awesome.
Oh no, the iPhone worked marvelously.
Yes, the iPad.
The iPad was being sketchy today, which is not usual for us.
I've got my iPad. I don't know if mine is better than yours. I don't even know if mine's on the network.
Well, man, I flipped mine off the network and just used my data, but I have tons of data, so
oh,
that's why it was probably working so
I
well.
mean, I got unlimited data, but I've got like 33% charge, and I don't have an iPhone.
I don't need an iPhone. I can just plug it into the bottom.
Oh,
I just need somebody to
yeah.
call Mark on Hangouts. This is like a good thing it's the after show now. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it was problematic in the middle of the show. Now it's the after show, so whatever. So hi everybody out there. I hope you had a good time, Mark. You know,
Yeah, that was awesome, man.
good. Because we usually ask people like, so how was it? Could we do anything better for you?
here,
And
I got
we-
33%.
we got-
That'll get us to the. That'll get us.
We
to
got
the-
some
that'll just
awesome
throw us
questions from the crowd too.
Mark,
so.
I'm gonna hang up on you and I'm gonna call you back. Okay.
It'll be
Sounds
from
good.
it'll be from my phone, so you'll get called from me.
Cool.
I gotta do the thing where I hang up on you first. Okay, here we go.
You chat room folks are awesome.
Chat folks
Where's it go?
just
Down here?
knocking it out.
Right there.
All right.
Yeah, we didn't warn them that there was a shtick at the end.
Right, like we just break into song. It's funny because we did prepare for a whole bunch of other stuff.
We did.
Yeah.
Yes. We should have known better, right?
We should have known better to, Well, when we have Alex on,
There we go.
Yo, 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 yo.
hey, he's back. Okay,
Look
good.
at that. Piece of
And there's
cake.
a good chance that will actually charge my phone. So, all right, cool.
Can you hear us, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Awesome.
I have no idea what's going on in the chat
Yeah,
room,
Mark,
so-
we prepared you for a bunch of stuff, and then didn't mention that the after show is just this ridiculous song that we sing. That we just keep streaming. Like we have to cut the show off because the show can only be so long before people will stop listening to it.
True.
But we let the after show go for a little bit longer because people like to hang out and
Chat
kind
with
of
us,
Keep
yeah.
keep the dialogue going.
We also release this to our patrons too, as like a special thing for the patrons.
So, Mark, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you a very selfish question because I have 45,000 words of my own PBTA game that needs to get finished, and I'm like at this nice spot where I just ran it at Breakout, and I don't want to change anything anymore. So, how do I go about making the ash can? Like, what's like? Do you have like a? I mean, because you've now made several ash cans. Like, I know that the Ward. Narcos. What else? What else do you have? Oh, did you guys do? What is it? Passiones de Passiones?
Yeah, Pasión de las Pasiones, right? I mean, I
Right.
can't. I'm so thrilled. I don't even have enough time anymore to talk about all the Latino games. Like,
Yeah.
there's Nahual, which is Miguel's game. There's Pasión de las Pasiones, which is Brendan Leon Gambetta. Like, in my career, there's more than one Latino game designer publishing PBTA games. It's fucking amazing.
Yep. Yeah, and actually, one of our sister shows, Senda from She's a Super Geek, actually has run that game several times. I don't think she's run it on the show yet.
Not a sister show anymore. It's part of the network.
It's part of the network, yeah. She's run it. She absolutely loves that game. Like she can't say
It's
enough
awesome.
about it.
Good. Yeah, so when it comes to ash cans, like what we have realized about PBTA games in particular, is that it's really easy for the writing to get ahead of the design. So a thing probably most people don't know about Urban Shadows is that Andrew and I put away like 40,000 words after the Kickstarter was over.
I think I actually heard that when I talked to Drew
Yeah.
one time.
And it wasn't because like anybody screwed up. Like it was because by the time the Kickstarter was done and we had play tested it at a completely new level and learned a ton about design, especially in PBTA, and learned a ton about what we wanted to talk about, we were basically left with a text that like did no longer describe the game we had in mind.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
What we took to do was trying to strip down to the core the core of whatever a game is and do that first, right, with the ash can. So with Cartel, I basically was like, okay, look, here's what I think this game is about. I think this game is about these moves. It's about secrets. It's not really about violence. And this is what we're going to do. Let's do it, right? And I had run it before at Metatopia, I believe. So it must have run it the November before. So by the can, which is like April, I had already like run it sometimes and run it at home a couple times. And I was like, let's just do this thing, right? So I wrote it. My buddy Justin edited it, and we got it out there. I was like, half these moves suck or whatever, right? And that process of refining the moves, refining the core of the game, we have now learned is actually what makes an Apocalypse World pack really challenging. Writing it, that's tough. That's tough. But designing it, fuck, man. Like, it's like trying to make a watch work when you don't know anything about watches. You just have a bunch of metal.
I mean, because I'm at this point where, like, I've had the game in design since 2016, and I've never like wrote it all the way through. Like, I've written all the rules I've needed, like, and they're all just sitting in Google Docs, like, chapter by chapter. But I have done, like, for the actual playtest, like, I have, I went ahead and laid out playbooks, and I went out and laid out all the basic moves and all that stuff. But
awesome.
I'm trying to get to, okay, what do I take from the too many words that I have to put into the to the smaller ash can, so that the core of this game is something playable.
Cool. Yeah, let me tell you about something I caught from the ash can that might be helpful. So what's interesting about Cartel is that you can't really have fronts in Cartel, right? Like, if I say, like there's this thing that's going to happen in the story, because the story is so tightly wound, it actually wrecks the entire thing. Right? If I'm like, the Federalists are this front, and you tick down the front, it's just likely. I mean, maybe if you're a really elegant GM, you can make it work. But what I have found is that it just gets in the way of everything else because it's so interpersonal. And I think you'll see this when you look at Monster Hearts 2. So if you look at the difference between Monster Hearts 1 and Monster Hearts 2, one of the things that Avery did was basically took away the whole, there's a much different way of thinking about how to create plots in Monster Hearts 2 than there is in Monster Hearts 1. And that's, in my opinion, because nobody used that shit for Monster Hearts 1.
Right.
Right? Like, by the time you got everything set up, you had everything you needed for 8 sessions of just the PCs bouncing off each other.
Yeah, well,
right?
games of interpersonal drama don't necessarily require outside fronts that are constantly moving in the background. They just need something to start pushing on everything, right? Because you already basically have everything you need from your relationship map, for lack of a better term. Yeah.
Plus you armed your GM with that great move to disrupt their daily routine.
Right, exactly. So you've got all this drama, right? So how do you introduce things that go outside of that are external to it and put pressure on the whole system? Well, in Cartel, you actually do that with individual characters. So the way that it works is that when you have an antagonist, like, say, Marlowe in The Wire, right, that person comes to represent a certain thing about the drug war, and they bring that with them as an individual. And they bring with them all of the drama that surrounds that particular aspect. So it may be, for example, that if you don't have La Esperanzada in your game, maybe you want a character like that as an NPC, like the good guy cop who's doing everything that they can to stop the war and like end the bad guys. And that person puts all the PCs in a tough position. Right.
Yeah.
So I looked at that system, these like NPC fronts, like that are centered around one particular character, and I was like, "Oh, this is awesome, and it totally works." Explaining this thing is like the same size as an ash can.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, "Fuck it, never mind. Strip that out, take all that out, put it aside, and I'll save it for the real book." And that, for me, is what it takes to make an ash can. You got to cut down to whatever the core of your system is.
Okay.
The minimal viable unit of your game is. That's what goes in an ash can.
I think I have a good idea on that, because I think the problem is I have 2 large subsystems to this game. So Mark, I don't know if you've ever heard of this. Like, I've been talking about it on the show.
Let me do it. Phil, what is the elevator pitch for Hydra hackers?
So you are hydropunk Robin Hoods stealing water from corporations to keep your neighborhood alive.
Awesome.
Yeah. So the game is basically normal Powered by the Apocalypse type stuff that you're doing, and then there's the hack, which is the hacking of water, which is a little bit more complex. It's there's a set of cards that you spread out and then get moved around and whatnot as you are hacking this water, because it's supposed to simulate the flow of water through a pipe.
Right, and I don't think that goes in the ash can. Like I think the hydro hack, the big one, like that whole subsystem gets saved for the main book.
And then there's the neighborhood.
Yep.
But the neighborhood mechanic, so the way the game's set up is that there are obviously playbooks for all the characters, but there is a playbook for the neighborhood, because you actually create your neighborhood and you pick like what type of neighborhood it is, and the neighborhood has moves to help out the characters. But the other thing is, and this is a little bit inspired by Underground, like one of my favorite RPGs ever. The neighborhood has stats that are bolstered by water, because water is the most important currency in the game, and so as water runs out, these stats start to drain, and you are like basically forced to go and find water to bolster your neighborhood. And if you want the neighborhood to advance, you need to get more water to fill up tanks, which are basically to get the neighborhood to work on like a community project. So
Yeah. So I mean, it seems to me like what you need to do is boil that down to: is there some strong sense of play from the neighborhood plus the basic moves? Right?
yeah, that's it's funny because I had been thinking up till we started talking that I could not put the neighborhood in the ash can, but now I think I have to put the neighborhood in, because that's the loop. The characters, the neighborhood, that's the loop that you go through. The big formal hack, which is like a model of a heist, like that's fun to do. But the real thing about the game is about playing this neighborhood and being people in this neighborhood.
Yeah, and let's be clear that not every game is a good fit for an ash can. Like, it is the case that we did not do an ash can for Urban Shadows, because there's no way to separate out the like dense playbook from the basic moves, the system of corruption from the factions.
Right.
Those systems is interdependent on the other, and so there's no way to reduce Urban Shadows to a 50-page document.
I think I have because I knew that the big hydro hack thing was going to be cumbersome and a pain. I also have a small move that's like the equivalent of Perilous Journey, that you can get some water in like a narrative move, and I think that's,
Exactly.
I think that's
But
enough.
it also
to
might
keep
be
it
the
going.
case that just like it's too big a game. And I think that's one thing I want to be careful of with the ash can kind of movement, is like I'm all about, like, I love this idea of people failing faster, trying things, seeing if they work, seeing if they don't work. We have a number of games in development that won't work that way.
So what's your threshold, like word count wise?
Like
Like what's the word count for an ash can where you're like, if I can't fit it in this, like we shouldn't
I mean,
shouldn't do this.
You're pushing it at 15K.
Okay.
Like 10 to 15K is about what you can fit into that 50-page format. Now, I know that Jason over at Genesis has done, I think it's a bigger ash can for his Magic game, for the Circles game.
Yeah, Circles of Power.
And that's kind of Circle of Power has like a longer thing. I mean, that's totally up to you. But I would say, like, if you're going past 20K words, you're just writing a book, man.
Right. Might as well just finish
it's not
the
an
book.
ash can anymore. Yeah. It's just a book, right? And like we've got games that aren't going to fit that. I think I would be surprised if a ton of Forged in the Dark stuff is going to fit in that ash can section, unless it's a really light hack like Scum and Villainy, where Scum and Villainy is a lot like Blades. If we see a hack that's as different from Blades as Monster Arts is from Apocalypse World, I don't think there's any way that fits in 50 pages.
Nope, that makes sense.
That does make sense. Like, I'm looking forward to seeing. So there's going to be like a larger version of Velvet Glove at some time in the near future, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of the next piece to us is what do we do next? So we've got some cool things coming up. The next thing, because like I said, we do try to kind of balance projects out, is that Brendan's been wrapping up Masks. You'll see Secrets of Aegis really soon here, and then back pretty quickly after that. So he's been working with me on a project we call Zombie World, which is actually a card-based game.
Heard about that.
Heard about that.
Yeah, I don't know if you've.
Yeah, cool. So the way that it works is there's no dice. Instead, you just have cards for resolving things. So when you make a move, you draw from a small deck of cards, which has similar probabilities to 2d6, but they're a little different.
Nice.
And your characters are created by drawing cards. So the first thing you do is you draw your past, because of course everybody wants to be a special forces, like soldier in the zombie apocalypse, but you might be an accountant, right? And then you draw your present, which is the role you currently fill for the community, and then you draw your trauma, like how you dealt with this terrible thing that happened when the apocalypse arrived, right? And that's your character. And what's really cool about it is we're giving you just like a couple of high points, but you build a character on top of that, right? So you're like, cool, I was an accountant. Now I'm the killer for the colony. Like when somebody needs to die, the colony all looks to me. And my trauma is that I am like manic, right? And there's some rules for how I play that out, right? And on top of that, you're like, okay, I was this guy, I was kind of mild-mannered, but like now I've kind of stepped into this role, and sometimes a little overly committed to some of the things I do, right? And you play that character based on those kind of fundamentals. And because they're randomized, it's constantly generating new and interesting characters for your game.
That's really cool.
I dig it.
That's actually super cool.
And the cool thing about it for me is also that it's all going to come in one box. So it's not like there's a book and a bunch of decks of cards. Like it's one box.
Yeah.
Like it just has a bunch of cards in it, and you just open that up, and that's your game for the evening.
All right, now I got to ask you a question. So if it's coming in a box, now we're talking about manufacturing. How what are the trials and tribulations of learning the process of manufacturing stuff been?
Oh my God. Like, yeah, books are relatively simple. I mean, once you find a printer you really like working with, like we work with Taylor Specialty Printing. I mean, they make beautiful books. They do all the 7th Sea books. They do all of our books. Working with overseas manufacturers or manufacturers in the States is a constant challenge. So we've used different folks for the Dragon deck and for the Mass deck, proofing, and a lot of working to make sure that the product is what they've promised. But yeah, like we've got a good experience with cards. I've done some work with John Wick Presents on the miniature side, like miniatures, dice, board games side for War of the Cross, which will be coming back to Kickstarter pretty soon. That's like a whole other world, man.
That's
it is. Yeah, it's a Wild West.
Well, we shelved a design we had. We I think we spent a year and a half.
It's called
it's like 2 years.
It's
I
called
think,
Relic
actually.
Hunters or Plunder Dice, which version of it you want.
Yeah, Relic Hunters.
Because
is the
custom
last one.
dice. Ow. Custom dice sucks. My cat just clawed me. It's
Yeah.
fine.
We did custom dice for masks actually because we had that many dice orders for masks, and that was wild too, right? Like you're trying to match colors, you're trying to like make sure it looks right. I mean, it's a trip.
Yeah, that was one where we looked at it and we were like, even if we kickstarted this, I don't think any of us have the experience to figure out how to go make dice in China and get them here. And
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, that's one of the things we're excited about with Zombie World is we've been doing this for a while. We've dealt with a couple different decks of tarot cards, decks of regular playing cards, and we're really excited to put out a product that I think will showcase what our community does, like what the indie community does, in a way that's accessible to people who like maybe don't even play role-playing games, right? Because it's just like, here's this box, and in it is zombie fiction.
Right. That's awesome.
Right? But that's not a product we could have made 2 years ago. Like we didn't know anything about cards. Right. And so there's got to be some institutional knowledge get built up in these institutions like Magpie or like the IGDN so that we can do this stuff. That's what we're excited about to do in the next few years.
That makes sense.
I mean, that was actually a thing that we were trying to look for, was like we were trying to look for somebody that we could be like, hey, if we raise this much money in a Kickstarter, can we basically hire somebody to go make our dice? Like help us. Like, can we get somebody who's done that kind of work before to like shepherd us through, like, here's who you talk to and here's what you need to know about getting, molds made and all of that stuff.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's the challenge we've run into a lot too, right? Is that the indie community has outgrown our putting together books in our basement with a stapler phase, right?
Yeah.
And now we are full on into the making shit at scale phase. And the number of people who have done that is tiny.
Yeah. And finding
Right.
them. I mean, like, it's one of the things I love about being part of the IGDN is that it's really easy to go in and just say to people like, hey, has anyone done this before? And like 4 or 5 people respond like in a few minutes, like, oh yeah, do this or do that or talk to this person. So it's super helpful, like to have that community of people to call upon.
Well, and I think it's funny because I think people probably think of us as like old school, right? At this point, like Magpie's been around forever or something like that. I've heard people say things to me like that. And I'm like yesterday, I go to like a convention like Gamma Trade Show, and you meet people who have been in the industry for 45 years, right? And here we are on year like 7. Like we're celebrating our 7th anniversary as a company next month. We've only been working full time at Magpie for probably 3 or 4 years. Everything before that was when Marissa and I were just in school and we were just getting started. And yeah, games every day, but there's still so much to learn every time we pick up a project, whether it's Cartel or Bluebeard's Bride or Zombie World or Velvet Glove or anything we're going to do in the future. It's always a learning process for how do we make this work.
So, is there any other questions in the chat room? Do we have anything for Mark? It's after 11 o'clock. I don't want to keep him too long.
No, I think we're good.
All right. Mark, is there any last words or anything you want to talk about before we get out of here?
The only thing I would say is that, like, I think that our community is in a really interesting space for design, and in the next year is just a really good explosion of good work. And I think that all of us at Magpie are committed to doing that work in public as much as possible. So I'm excited to answer questions like this and have these discussions. And I think that my hope is that we can build some new spaces to do so. And what I would call people to do, if there's any interest in building those spaces, is to start building them in public, because I do think that there's something special about public podcasts, public forums, public spaces. There's value in those private spaces like the IGDN as well. But I'm so excited at our community's ability to have this really sophisticated discussions around Powered by the Apocalypse or Forged in the Dark or Fate or whatever. You may not remember, that there was a time before all this stuff was just open source systems that anybody could use at any time. I'm pumped to see that continue to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really cool space to have.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well,
and thank you guys so much for having me on, man. It was a blast.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming out.
Well, all you folks in the chat room and all you folks that are listening on the after show, have a wonderful evening.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.